The deep sky. Days and months are travelers of eternity. So are the years that pass by. Those who steer a boat across the sea or drive a horse over the earth till they succumb to the weight of years, spend every minute of their lives traveling. There are a great number of ancients, too, who died on the road. I myself have been tempted for a long time by the cloud-moving wind, filled with a strong desire to wander. A narrow road to the deep north. Matsuo Basho. Translated from the Japanese by Nobuyuki Yuasa. Chapter 1. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch. B shift. There were many things Asuka did not consider when she agreed to travel from one sun to another. That is, did not allow herself to consider. Like, would she miss lying on her back in rough grass? The scent of damp earth in her nose as she scraped her nails against a real periwinkle sky? Like, would missing her brother sometimes still feel like a hole in her gut? She did not miss her mom. Like, did she actually want to live the rest of her life jogging the circumference of a spaceship's habitat wheel like a hamster, looking for a missing drill for Lala Williams? Problem was, Lala's missing drill could be anywhere. All Lala could tell her was that it had a red handle and that Sam may have borrowed it to fix a shelving unit in Agriculture Module C. But it wasn't among the plants or trays of soil, and Sam swore that Red had borrowed it after her. Red remembered using it to fix a vents issue before returning it to the bot maintenance shop, where it definitely wasn't. Asuka slowed to a walk. The thing about saying yes to the first, and probably only, one-way interstellar voyage to settle a new world was that there were no takebacks. But at least there was DAR, digitally augmented reality, which meant she never had to consider anything she didn't want to. On Earth, they had had to wear clunky headgear that enabled the wearer to access DAR, but before they'd left, the crew had chips implanted in their temples that could pipe an alternative reality directly into their brains. So, instead of jogging through a spaceship, Asuka hiked along a worn forest trail, ship invisible underneath. The light was soft, mottled olive. She wore an old pair of jeans and a faded Del Mar Exotic Bird Sanctuary t-shirt. In the distance, a wood thrush sang, "Hello, goodbye." Soft shadows enveloped her, and she could almost smell the pines, wet after rain. Almost. Also, there were no pesky rocks strewn across her path. She deleted them a week ago after tripping over one that wasn't really there. Like the rest of the crew of the Phoenix, she had grown up with DAR and was proficient at modifying it, though the base of this one had been designed for her by a professional. Only the best for Earth's heroes. "Alpha," Asuka said, as if it was ever necessary to summon their omnipresent ship AI. "Asuka?" Alpha's voice in her ears would be inaudible to the two women flirting in the middle of the trail, too preoccupied to make room for Asuka to pass. She gritted her teeth and said, "Excuse me," as she pushed around them, banging her elbow painfully against a protruding branch, a water pipe or something underneath the door. This was what had allowed DAR to surpass other augmented realities to dominate the global market. It could wrap the whole skin of the world in somewhere else, perfect when stuck in a small spaceship for decades. "I'm done looking for Lala Williams' drill. You got any other jobs for me?" she asked Alpha. Her eyes caught a flash of blue in the branches, and she stopped to look. As a child, She had loved birds the way other kids loved dinosaurs, saving all her money to buy a single robin for her dar. Now that she was an adult, her dar was stocked with the full catalog of real birds. And even so, she didn't tire of the thrill of spotting the denim blue jacket of a male western bluebird alight on a stump. I'll change your status to available. Should I mark your current job as complete? Mark it as I give up, said Asuka. That drill has fallen into another dimension. While theoretically possible, that seems unlikely. Asuka was about to snark back when a message appeared from the captain in the left side of her vision. Alt. Need you in the EAM 5 minutes ago. The EAM was the exterior airlock module. They wanted her to do a spacewalk outside. Asuka shaped words with her hands, composing and deleting several irritable responses, including, "Then you should have asked me 5 minutes ago," and "Sorry, I'm busy," and "Go jump into space," before settling on, "Yes, Captain," because she did like spacewalks. Unlike the other 79 crew on the Phoenix, Asuka was an alternate, which meant she didn't have a job exactly. Her job was just to do whatever was needed and be grateful she'd made the cut by the most microscopic of margins. Her job was not, as Captain McMahon often reminded her, to question orders or her place in the ship's claustrophobically small community. Asuka found 2 of the ship maintenance crew and first Vice Captain Yue in the middle of the woods, standing between an old cabin and a plywood outhouse, which were, underneath the illusion, the ship airlocks. The airlocks exited out onto the bow and stern sides of the wheel, respectively. On one side of the clearing, heavy black compression suits hung from a clothesline between 2 fir trees. Yue was tall, with perfectly shaped eyebrows and a long face that made her seem perpetually surprised. Her hair was close-shaven. Buzz cuts weren't mandatory, but they were popular among the crew. Easier to care for in space. Asuka had grown out her hair instead, and she was teased for being a rebel. They were already suiting up Kat, one of the Australian reps. She had light blue eyes, picture-perfect freckles, and an impressive quantity of natural self-confidence. "Look who decided to show up," Kat said, without maliciousness. "Susie, you're just in time to witness my last spacewalk." "Last one?" "I'm scheduled for medical next cycle." Insemination appointment, she meant. All crew were required to have a baby as part of the mission, and once pregnant, Kat would no longer be eligible for walks. "It might not happen right away," said Asuka, for whom it hadn't. "It will," said Kat, fluttering her eyes with pleasure. "My mother had 4 of us, and each time it was like, bam, missile lock. You could say fertility is one of my key qualifications. Well, that, my ability to do multivariable calculus in my head, and my amazing biceps." She flexed a bare arm and winked at one of the crew trying to fit it into a suit. "Oh, I thought it was your fully developed ego." Asuka kept her tone light, but annoyance bubbled up like acid reflux. Kat laughed. "All right, Susie?" Yue asked, coming over. She was 8 months pregnant with twins, and she was asking Asuka that? "What's the mission?" Asuka asked, stripping off her clothes and holding out her arms, then legs, for the other crew to squeeze into a compression suit, size extra small. "We spotted a thing on the side of the hull in North Quad H-18, said Yue. "What do you mean, a thing?" After spending the first 10 years of their mission in hibernation, they had woken 11 months ago, as planned, flying through deep, empty space, light years from anything. Radiation, cosmic rays, stardust, and junk were always a concern, considering the speed they were traveling. The ship was equipped with a radiation windscreen, nose shield, magnetic field, and advanced warning system to protect them, as well as an army of bots and drones to repair any problems as quickly as possible. But they were literally in uncharted territory. The farthest humans had traveled up to this point was Jupiter, so no one really knew what they might find out here. Unclear. We can't tell what it is from the cameras. Looks like a shadow or a smudge. Same when Yaz investigated with a bot. So anyway, the captain wants you and Kat to go put some au natural eye rolls on it. Asuka caught a roll of Yingyue's eyes. For some reason, Yingyue and the captain didn't get along, which was the main reason Asuka liked Yingyue. Does it look artificial? Something alien, she meant. Kat laughed. You've been reading too much science fiction. We're in the literal middle of nowhere. Yingyue offered Asuka a heavy pair of boots. Hey, what's the holdup? No time for gossip. The captain's words appeared in front of all of them. Despite regularly telling herself she didn't care what Captain McMahon thought, that her name was only Becky, and that she was the same age as the rest of them, Asuka felt her gut tighten. Just following protocol, Yingyue replied, and then added something aloud in Mandarin for their ears only, which appeared as subtitles for those who needed it. You should try it sometime. One of the maintenance crew snickered. Hold still, someone said, and the helmet came down over Asuka's head. She felt them strap the heavy oxygen pack to her back. Which of you is carrying the toolkit? Yingyue asked, unhooking one of the cases from an old hitching post. Asuka reached for it, but Kat intercepted. I've got longer arms, she said. One of these days you're going to drop it, and then you'll be crying ice crystals all the way home. Okay, Yingyue said, but Asuka's mission lead. Asuka suppressed a groan as they clipped the kit to Kat's chest. Kat never listened to her. They're good to go, the other crew confirmed. Alpha, last check, said Yingyue. Asuka and Kat obediently held their arms up. The ship AI didn't see things on the ship in the human sense, but she could sense the nanochips in the clothing they wore and could tell if the suit components were properly fitted. Everything appears normal. All right then, everyone, clear the eam. Yingyue gave them one last look. Be careful out there, said Alpha. It's dangerous. The cabin door opened, and beyond it was a chamber with cold, white metal walls, and a door at the other end with a thick glass window. They stepped inside, and all door evaporated. It didn't work outside the ship. They waited impatiently as the air hissed out of the airlock. Given the cramped size of the chamber, Asuka was forced to spend this time contemplating the back of Kat's suit. Sounds like the situation in the Pacific is getting spicy, said Kat. Yeah, Asuka agreed, unsure what Kat was talking about. The typical tension between the usual countries, probably. Namely, China and the United States. Asuka didn't really follow the news as much as she should, but she wasn't about to admit that to Kat. Your mom still live in Tokyo? Kat asked. Maybe, said Asuka, like she didn't care. She didn't know where her mom was now, and it hurt too much to think about. What do you mean? Don't you talk? Nope. I thought you two were close. Actually, we're not. Kat contorted herself, but she couldn't turn her head in the close quarters to look at Asuka. She settled for twisting her faceplate to the ceiling. What? Can we not, please? Fine, Sorry. Kat gripped the wheel attached to the door, waiting for the light to turn green. I broke my cat, she said softly, like she was making an offering. Her pain for Asuka's, except what she was talking about was her truly hideous pink ceramic cat. I'm so sorry. I know. Me too. Kat's voice caught like she might cry. She was serious. I tried to fix it, and I made a mess of it. And I keep thinking how I can't get another, because we're never going home. The hexagonal light on the door turned green, and Kat turned the wheel. Anyway, if this thing out there is something extraterrestrial, I'm going to be the first one to see it. Try and keep up, Susie. And Asuka retorted in a moment she'd regret for the rest of her life. I'll race you. Chapter 2. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch. B shift. They stepped out of the airlock onto a metal scaffold facing the stern of the ship, small headlamps flicking on. Without the proximity of the sun or any other star, the Phoenix didn't have a light side. It was all dark side. And cold as nothing, though she didn't feel it. Absence was what Asuka liked best about space. The forced perspective of hearing nothing but her breath in her ears. The blackness, and the billions of distant stars wheeling around them as the ship spun. See you later. Kat took off, jogging along the scaffold. Hey! Asuka started after her, already sinking into the familiar rhythm of attaching and detaching her two safety clips. On off, as she moved, careful to stay tethered to the safety rail at all times. Kat was getting farther ahead. The Phoenix was constructed like an umbrella. A protective radiation windscreen and nose shield in front, directly under which were tucked forward-facing engines, ready to deploy for deceleration. The shield was at the front end of a metal shaft that stretched the length of a sports field to the back of the ship, which had immense, retracted paneled solar sails, followed by 4 rear engines. Between the solar sails and the forward engines, in the middle of the shaft, was their great spinning habitat wheel, where the crew lived. The wheel spun, generating enough centrifugal force to simulate gravity for the occupants inside, and those standing on the scaffolding that ran along the outside of it on its bow and stern sides. Asuka imagined the scaffolding that ran on the inside and outside of the wheel looked like lips, and the various modules attached in intervals to either side of the wheel rim for crew quarters, sanitation, drone operations, etc., like the teeth. The scaffold extended a shoulder width past the widest modules, giving crew easy access for exterior maintenance. The thin metal grate shook with each step, which wasn't nerve-wracking at all. Thanks to the gravity from the spin, they could have been out for a stroll on Earth, if an endless void didn't surround them on all sides. Ladies, slow down, said Yue from her spot in the drone ops control room inside the ship. She had direct access to their suit and ship exterior camera feeds. She sounded rattled. Kat, are you not using your clips? She wasn't. Damn it. That's how Kat was moving so fast, the cheater. Asuka swore and dropped her own clips and began to run faster, but it was hard because she was laughing. The whole thing was absurd, childish, and it felt good. Kat whooped so loud the radio squealed. Sure, they were taking risks fooling around like this, and Captain McMahon was definitely going to tear them to pieces after. But for a moment, everything felt normal. Except they were running through space. Kat reached North Quad, just as Asuka's boot caught against the scaffold grate and she stumbled against the outside of crew quarters D. Her heart leapt, but she was all right, totally fine. She gripped the waist-high safety cable that ran along the outside of the scaffold and forced herself to keep moving. "Need a status update?" said Captain McMahon. She was chewing something, and the wet, smacking noise set Asuka's teeth on edge. A loud swallow right in her ear. "Do you have eyes on the anomaly yet? Give me details." "Almost there, Captain," said Kat. She began climbing one of the many maintenance ladders a couple of meters past the spot to get closer to the location where the thing had been spotted. Asuka sprinted the final meters to the bottom of the ladder and clipped herself back on. She was just ascending as Kat used metal rungs affixed to the ship's body to maneuver out to the spot. "You ever think about how we live our life in constant motion?" Kat's voice asked in her ear. "Born on a rock, spinning through space, and now here we are, rushing off to another. How come we can never just be? We've always got to go somewhere." Asuka stopped and turned, trying to penetrate the deep darkness all around them. She imagined she could feel the pinpricks of heat from so many stars out there, forming and dying millions of years ago. If she looked backward, she didn't, she might see how far they'd come, and how insignificant that was against the scale of the universe. She heard Kat say, "Where did you say it was, Yingyue?" "Hang on, I'm caught on something." "Okay, but I'm telling you," there was a flash of something bright as the sun, and then nothing. Chapter 3. Fledgling Arctic terns made their first journey from the South to North Pole without their parents, finding their own way over tens of thousands of miles. Before takeoff, the entire colony would fall silent. This moment was called the Dread. Chapter 4. The Phoenix, 3,980 cycles after launch, 0 cycles after explosion, B shift. The high-pitched siren went on and on. Asuka blinked and tried to focus her eyes. Her vision doubled, then resolved. Must have hit her head. Concussion? Felt like she'd been kicked in the sternum. Debris from the Phoenix floated away, illuminated by a penumbra of blue light spilling out of a hole in the hull about a meter wide. She wanted to vomit, but that would be a bad idea in a spacewalk helmet. This was bad. This was bad to the nth degree. She surveyed the stern of the ship toward the 4 tulip-shaped rear engines. Everything in that direction seemed intact, at least. "Cut alarm," she said. The alarm stopped. Her breath sounded ragged and loud. "Can anyone hear me?" No answer. Her radio must be down. "Alpha?" The ship's AI couldn't hear her out here, of course. Alpha communicated via DAR, and DAR didn't work outside the ship. Did anything hurt? Just her head, and maybe her back, and everything. But otherwise, okay. Okay then. She tried to reset the radio, but got only static. For a panicked moment, she thought everyone was dead. But no. The transmitter on her wrist was broken. Must have smashed against the side of the ship when she checked her short tether. Attached. And to a part of the ship that was still there. Otherwise, she'd be falling away from the Phoenix. As it was, she was meters out into space, being towed around by the spin of the ship's habitat wheel. Where was Kat? She looked out at the receding debris. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Asuka rolled her tongue across her teeth. Copper and salt. She flipped back and hooked a boot on the tether to stop herself from spinning. Her whole body screamed in protest. Only 7 meters from the ship, and it felt like a kilometer. Things were coming back to her in bits. Something had exploded. A piece of broken off hull had slammed into her chest, knocking her back against the ship. But what happened? And how could everything go to shit like that? Asuka was panicking, guzzling oxygen. She unhooked her boot from the cable and she began to spin again, arms and legs out like a sacrifice. She forced herself to narrow her focus, to calm down. The small spear of her headlamp pierced the dark. It caught a boot without a foot in it, small and tumbling away, and her chest ached with a hollowness. So, Cat was dead. And who else? She liked Cat, even though she was so patronizing when she discovered something else that Asuka didn't know or hadn't done, which was often. But Cat fixed Asuka cups of tea after meals, and she was always up for simulation trips to places they would never go in real life, even if Cat only ever wanted to go to Europe. And now, here Asuka was, with a feeling like she needed to howl, or she would burst. A new alarm pinged in her suit. She checked her suit metrics: oxygen, carbon dioxide, and battery level, which powered her propulsion pack and air scrubbers and regulated the temperature in her suit. Oxygen and battery were low, and her carbon dioxide was getting up to the danger zone. Fantastic. Super. Time to get back inside. Asuka hauled herself in, hand over hand on her lifeline, to the rim of the ship. It took nearly everything in her to do it. At last, Asuka was clinging to the outside of the spinning habitat wheel, in a constant state of being thrown away from the ship. With a groan, she hauled herself up onto the scaffold. She gave thanks to the fact that she could still do a pull-up. Gasping, she stared into the void where the section of scaffold used to be. A chunk of the Phoenix was no longer there. Emergency lights blinked and shuddered from the hole the explosion had torn in the ship. She gazed at what was left of their dining module. One long table was still intact and bolted to the floor, either a testament to the quality engineering that had gone into it, or the fact that it had been partly shielded from the blast by the other tables. Otherwise, the mod was a wreck. No fire. The atmosphere was gone. There was soup all over the floor. In the dim blue light, she saw feet behind the half-demolished serving counter, and another arm sticking out at the far end near the door. 2 bodies. She narrowly missed getting beamed by a box of unmeat patties. She snagged it and slung it back into the hole. She eyed the gap and doubted she could make it with a running jump. Her mind flashed back to the scrawny girl she had once been, hopping over big puddles after a rain and coming home streaked with mud from head to foot. Papa plucking her up and slinging her over one shoulder and marching her straight to the shower, calling her sweet muddy pie. She could take the long way around, but she wasn't sure she had enough oxygen. She was down to 5%. There was supposed to be extra in the tank for an emergency, but she'd never cut it this close before. Would this be the moment that proved she wasn't good enough? She was out of time. She backed up, braced herself, and unclipped. Her boots on the metal made no sound at all. She leapt, and then she was falling and flying, and she juiced the gas jets of her propulsion pack using precious battery. In the split second as she crossed the gap, a memory came to her of a goose taking off from the flat face of a warm pond, wings beating furiously, feet dragging as it tried to climb air. Then Asuka slammed into the other side. She nearly lost her grip, but she got the clip of her tether above the knot of the safety cable, thinking about how infinite her journey might have been if she had missed. She hung there, panting into the hollow of her helmet. Her compression suit was much more flexible than those clumsy bags of pressurized air astronauts used to wear. But at the end of the day, she was still wearing a big bubble on her head and thick insulation from finger to toe. She got back up. Oxygen at 3%. The emperor penguin could slow its own heart rate while plunging through dark, cold waters for almost half an hour. Exhale. Keep moving. It took a few more minutes to work her way back to the airlock, clipping and unclipping to the safety cable and trying not to guzzle her remaining oxygen. She'd bitten her tongue, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Shock, maybe. The airlock door should have opened for her, but when she reached it, it was sealed. Nothing. She tried twisting the handle of the airlock. It didn't give. She fumbled again. It wasn't the door. It was her hands. She couldn't do it. This is Asuka. Her voice was thin, more like a gasp. Does anybody copy? Static. She checked her oxygen. 1%. Nearly out. Carbon dioxide in the red. Battery drained. Shit. This is Asuka. Does anybody copy? Could anyone hear me at all? She banged on the door, tried the broken radio, and again. She touched her faceplate to the door. Turn, and she might catch a last glimpse of Kat receding into that deepness of nothing. The pieces of her would last forever like that in space, even as they spread millions, billions, and then trillions of miles apart. But the whole universe could never put her back together. Humpty Dumpty. Entropy. Law of everything. And yet we bother, thought Asuka. It should have been me, not Kat. She banged the door again. Weaker, dizzier, colder. It'd be hours before she completely froze out here. She'd asphyxiate before that. I'm scared, she had told her mother as everything burned. Heat pressing down against her face. Her mother's voice firm and hoarse in her ear. Shh, shh. Picture a box. Asuka shut her eyes, obedient for once, and pictured her mother's black and crimson red lacquer jewelry box. Now, think of pearls. That is your fear, okay? Put them in that box one by one. Count them. 1, 2, 3. Asuka straightened, hammered on the door. No one was coming. Her heart thudded. Darkness ate at the corners of her vision. She could lean back and fall into the great Milky Way. It wasn't her fault. She'd done her part and made it home. She sank to her knees and looked back toward Earth. Couldn't see it. Something, she thought distantly, was wrong with the stars. Her last thought was of her mother, light years behind her, growing old watching the night sky. Chapter 5. USA, 13 years before launch. Asuka was in their neighbor's pool. It was dark, and her mom's arms were around her. They floated listlessly in the cold, cold water. She couldn't see the stars. Smoke burned her lungs and made her eyes tear. Everyone else was gone. Everyone but Asuka and her mom. And somewhere out there, maybe, her dog Inu. Left alone in a neighborhood on fire. Asuka tasted bitter ash and chlorine. The jet-black water lapped gently against the side of the pool. She was mad at her mom for not letting her go after Inu when the dog escaped. The whole family had been on their way out the door, headed for the autobus waiting to evacuate them to safety. And then her mom had stepped on Inu's tail, and Inu yelped and ran off, leash tearing from Asuka's hands. And she tried to run after, but her mom had grabbed her and wouldn't let her go. And she bit her mom's arm and tasted blood. She screamed that she hated her, that she would never speak to her again. She cried big, dirty tears, and still her mom held her tight. Wasn't she mad at Asuka? All of this was Asuka's fault, wasn't it? It wasn't. It was. And now she'd never see Inu again. The bus was gone, with Papa and her brother on board, and it was just she and her mom in this pool, waiting for California to stop burning. They drifted toward the edge of the pool. What if her mom got tired? Would they die? She didn't want to die. Asuka, don't. She grabbed the side of the pool with both arms. Her mom snatched her back from the heat of it, too late. Asuka shrieked, more from the knowledge that she'd made a terrible mistake than from the pain. No pain yet. That came later. Just a minute later. Maybe more. They were underwater again, and Asuka was aware only of her mother's arms and her mother's legs, and how they kept her alive, kicking, slapping, pushing back against the water and the soot and the pool and the fire and the clouds that hid the moon. Chapter 6. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch, 0 cycles after explosion, B shift. Bright light stuck into Asuka's eyelashes like pollen. Her eyes teared from the glare. She was inside. She was alive, and people were peeling her from her suit. She opened her mouth to remind them the pieces of the suit had to be inspected before they were hung in the cabinet. Her throat felt like it had been scraped with sand. She swallowed and coughed. Someone gave her some water. Cold, she said. She thought she said. Could anyone hear her? You're all right now, Asuka, said Alpha's voice in her ear, soothing. And then the ship AI added, I told you it was dangerous to go outside. You should have listened to me. You could have died. Out of reflex, Asuka wanted to argue with her, but Cat had died. She turned her head and saw dirt, moss, rock, cabin, tree, except the tree was purple. How was that? She squinted at the bark. A large armored beetle climbed up the tree. A second later, it did again, and again. There was only one beetle, and it was not real, and she saw it climb in a dizzying loop. Something was wrong. She reached up and pawed at her temple with stiff, numb fingers until she felt the little bead implanted beneath the skin. The cabin and trees shivered and disappeared. Now, what she saw was true. She was lying on her back in a white airlock module, in a ship, hurtling through space, and everything was mayhem. Or maybe it only felt like that. 10 crew crowded around her in the narrow module. It would have been a squeeze in normal circumstances, but half of them were pregnant. Not, of course, Asuka. She pushed that thought away. What happened? First Vice Captain Yume asked. Asuka heaved air until the black spots in her vision began to recede. An alarm blared. In the corner, pieces of compression suits lay in a heap on the floor, like someone had hastily rifled through them to find a fit. Cat, she tried to say, and coughed. She wouldn't cry. It's all right, Asuka, said Alpha. Breathe. Is Cal alive? Someone asked. Asuka was shivering. Someone took her in their arms and held her, and the heat of the other person's body slowly seeped into hers. She didn't know who it was. It didn't matter. The walls disappeared, and she lay in a graveyard overgrown with flowers. She heard Yume say, "Give her space." The arms were withdrawn, and the graveyard too. Don't worry, Asuka. You're safe now, Alpha said. Yume knelt and cupped Asuka's neck. Her hand was soft and warm. Asuka was sprawled on a platform as a speeding train went by. Still, the sensation of that touch was enough to steady her. She blinked and lifted her arms so they could tug the top part of the compression shirt off over her head. Someone had already removed her pants. Yume let go, and Asuka was in her underwear on the cold floor of the ship. Someone was saying, "Are you all right, Susie?" She hated that nickname. We had no read from your suit at all. We thought you were dead. She was thinking again of the fire, when she and her mom had almost died, and it was all her fault. Ruth saved you. Ruth. She felt something sharp in her breastbone, which she ignored. Involuntarily, she twisted to locate her, but there were too many feet, shins, thighs in her way. Are you hurt? Yume asked again, leaning in. So many people talking at once. At least Asuka was starting to feel her body again. Something exploded, said Asuka, and Cat wasn't clipped. Their silly race, running along the catwalk, and now Cat's amazing biceps and fertile ovaries would be frosted over and flying through darkness for eternity. There was a strangled noise coming from her. People reached out to soothe her. This isn't your fault, said Alpha. Remember that. Asuka shut her eyes to keep tears back. Alpha didn't know. She was programmed to say things like that, to provide therapy to the crew, make sure they ate their vegetables and took their little pills. But Asuka had been mission lead, and if Cat had been tethered, then maybe... She felt her blood drumming in her ears. Yume leaned closer to hear her, her face scrunched in worry. What do you mean? What exploded? Asuka rewound her memory and tried to think. How had it happened exactly? Like a cork popping, maybe, or shrapnel emanating from the ship at high speed. No, she didn't want to remember that. Was it aliens? Someone else asked. She didn't know, okay? She was smothered in their questions. You seem stressed, Asuka, said Alpha. Shall I tell you about the mating ritual of the bowerbird? It was in Asuka's personnel file that she had a thing about birds. Asuka shook her head to tell Alpha no, and the pain of it nearly killed her. She tried to sit up, but a great weight pressed her down. Gravity's off, said Yume. Yaz is working on it. Yasmin was their chief engineer. Hands reached out and helped her into sitting position. The world shifted and shifted again. She wished it would stay itself. She lay there until she had steadied herself, then pinched the bridge of her nose. She could think again, around the sandy edges of a massive headache. there was Ruth, getting dressed. Their eyes met a moment. One of the sides of Ruth's mouth lifted in a kind of smile, like they were still best friends, and something in Asuka hiccuped. Ruth went back to pulling on her inside gloves, and Asuka was left staring after her a second too long. People were crying. They had all grown up together, training for this mission. Now, some of them were dead. It didn't make sense. But then, nothing had felt real to Asuka since last year, when they'd first woken up on the ship after a decade asleep. "What does the captain want us to do?" Asuka asked. No one knew. Who else died? She'd seen the bodies in the dining mod. No one knew that either. No one, it seemed, knew anything. They were all in a panic. Not that Asuka blamed them. She was too, or ought to be. It was just that her feelings hadn't caught up with her yet. "Alpha, tell us," she said. Alpha tracked the heart rates, blood pressures, oxygen levels, and body temperatures of the crew to monitor their health and stress levels. She should know who was alive. Alpha's disembodied voice cut across the expectant silence. "I am so sorry. My biometric monitoring program is rebooting. Please give me 5 minutes." "Let's get you to the clinic," Yume said. "Hina, tell the captain we retrieved Susie." The tall, long-limbed crew member in question turned away, making rapid gestures with gloved hands. Movement Alpha would convert into a text message. Asuka forced herself to stand. She wasn't sure she could have done it without 3 crew bracketing her, heaving her up. Again, she saw a flash of the graveyard, and other things. A savanna, a lake. Then they let go, and all of it was gone in a blink. The weight of the extra gravity caused her to stagger. Yume stepped close and began to rub her all over, until feeling returned to her skin. And they were back on the platform, waiting for the next train. "Captain isn't responding," reported Hina. "Keep trying. Someone get closer, Asuka," she heard Yume say. "Thank you," Asuka mumbled. She wondered what Yume thought of her scars, ropey and purple-gray along her forearms and palms. But then, she wasn't the only one with scars. They were all survivors of some kind, weren't they? Hers reminded her of what she had cost other people to be here. She didn't like to think of it. There was the snick of a compartment shutting, and then clean clothes were handed to her, size small, but a little too big. The black shirt bunched in the front around the torso, meant to provide extra space when pregnant, which Asuka wasn't. Asuka folded the cuffs of her shirt with unsteady fingers. She felt someone exhale warm breath on her toes before socks were pulled over her feet and gloves over her fingers. No shoes. They never wore shoes. Why should they? Their whole world was only the Phoenix. Their clothes were boring, practical, all black, and tear-resistant, the sort that came in S, M, L, and XL, and could be grabbed out of any nearby storage compartment. Black didn't stain, and it was the sort of fabric that could be replaced and mended with minimal waste. Fashion was irrelevant, because reality was something individual and malleable, thanks to Dar. She pressed her temple, and it became an ancient Counting Crows t-shirt she had found in the Digimart giveaway. She understood they were once a band, but honestly just wore it for the name. In other people's Dar, her shirt might be a swimsuit or military camo within the restrictions she had set. Her body was her body, and that could include any alterations to physical appearance she might choose to make, or how much of it she wanted to show. And the trees were growing out of the sky. Or she was standing upside down. "Something's wrong with my Dar." "Silly goose," said Alpha. "You must have bumped your head." Asuka again cut off her dar and looked around the naked white walls of the module at all the scared faces. Her heart beat, but it felt like it wasn't her blood swishing through its ventricles. She couldn't process what was happening, how everything had unraveled in an hour. That cat was gone. "What's wrong with me?" she thought. "Feel. Cry. Something." A crackling fills their ears, and then the awful, tearing sound of someone trying not to completely lose it. "Oh my God. They killed the captain." Chapter 7. USA, 13 years before launch. After the fire, home was 4 lines of chalk on muddy, dead grass, with a green tent for Asuka and her older brother Louis, and a red one for Mom and Papa. All around them were rows and rows of chalk squares and other tents and other families, and 2 smelly portable toilets on either end of the row. At night, Louis would hold her hand, sweat slicking between their palms as they listened to their parents argue. Mom wanted to move back to Japan, but Papa resisted. "The kids don't speak Japanese. Neither do I. They'll learn. If she tries to make us go, we'll run away," Louis whispered. But anyway, nothing was ever decided. One of their neighbors planted a flag outside their tent, a black eagle on a field of red and white stripes, holding a scroll in one talon and a rifle in the other. It was for the Militia for the American Constitution, usually just called MAC for short. Mom warned them not to stare at it. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tangled. She pinned Louis with her dark eyes. "And no space dock." "Do they have guns?" Louis wanted to know. "Let's not be dramatic," said Papa, reaching out to smooth Louis's hair. Asuka and her family occupied their square as if it were an island. They ignored the bulge of the big square tent encroaching on one corner. Then, one afternoon after volunteers came and everyone was happy and full of hot food, Papa pulled a chair right up to the line. "Hi, I'm Michael." Mom tensed and put an arm around Asuka. The 2 neighbors had stripped their shirts and sat baking in half-broken lawn chairs beneath their flag. The older neighbor had a beard as big as a scarf. A stinky joint passed back and forth between them. "You Mexican?" they asked across the border. Friendly. Papa smiled with all his teeth. "This and that." They gestured at the rest of the family. "Chinese?" "Japanese." "Huh," said one, eyes brightening. "I love Pokemon." "What's Pokemon?" Louis asked. "I'm going to be an ornithologist," Asuka offered. "Shh," said Mom, yanking her back. "Come sit with me, Asuka-chan." "Listen to this," Papa told them, beckoning to Louis. Louis cleared his throat. "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary," Papa had paid him $20 to memorize the words. Mom released Asuka, rose, and walked away like she had an urgent need to use the toilet. Asuka watched her leave, not understanding yet the deep despair Mom must have felt living in that place full of people, farting and playing loud music and having sex. To have nothing when they could be living across the ocean in a house built of all the dreams of her parents that she had discarded. How it felt to have a son who insisted on using his middle name because he didn't look like a Rio, who wanted to belong. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. Louise bellowed. Their neighbors laughed and applauded. "You have a smart boy," they told Papa. Papa dabbed at the sweat that had accumulated along his hairline. The sun beat down, and the four of them talked and laughed. Above them, the MAC flag hung limp in the invisible heat. Asuka glared at the parched dirt between her toes and imagined burrowing down with her mind. Down she tunneled through the crust of the earth, through the molten core, until she was bursting up into the cool nighttime happening at that moment in the middle of the streets of Tokyo. Because what she did understand, even then, was that the world could never be one thing for everyone at the exact same time. Chapter 8. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch, 0 cycles after explosion, B shift. Killed, Yume said. What is he talking about, Alpha? Voices cascaded over each other, churning the air in the room to white water. Their black clothes were just a blur against the pristine white module walls. Asuka's tongue curled around the bittersweet taste of fear. She tried to focus on what was going on. Someone tugged another person's shirt. A gesticulating arm banged Asuka's head, and she cried out in pain. Quiet! No one was listening to Yume, standing in the middle of the scrum, arms around her pregnant belly. Hey, shut up! Ruth's voice rang out, and people miraculously stopped. I have finished rebooting and can report on status of crew, said Alpha. 3 dead, including Kat. And Captain Becky McMahon and Winnie had both been in the dining mod at the time of the explosion. Alpha didn't know what caused it. Asuka's messages seemed to be working, even though the forest in her DAR was, sideways now. Wild theories were already flying on the public feed. A manufacturing problem, space junk, first contact. A voice cut in over the ship-wide channel. Chief Engineer Yaz, cool and quick. All crew members, brace on 10. Everyone kicked into motion, moving to spots along the wall and grabbing whatever and whoever was in reach. And of course, Asuka found herself side by side with Ruth against the stern side airlock door. Ruth, who had barely talked to her in 2 years, 12 if you counted the 10 years in between, who had saved her life. They looked at each other, looked away. Asuka grabbed Ruth's shoulder and a second later found Ruth's arm looped through hers. She felt the body memory of that sensation. Arm locked in arm, the feeling that they were going to take on the universe together. Her world shifted, and instead of in the cabin in the woods, they were standing on a beach before an immense ocean. The sky was perfect and blue. Seagulls swooped overhead. The crew were dressed in beachwear. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, said Yaz. The sand slid underfoot, and they were tugged in the same direction. A massive wave thundered down over them, through them. Then the weight on her body eased. She could move again, without an elephant bearing down. Whatever the chief engineer had done, their G-force was back to normal. Ruth dropped her arm, and the beach evaporated. Asuka rubbed her eyes, trying to orient herself. The manual airlock handle dug into her shoulder. You okay? Ruth asked. Yeah. Thanks, by the way. Sure, no big. Ruth's fingers twitched. She wasn't looking at Asuka anymore, but there was a flush at her neck, where her dark brown buzz ended like the edge of a shadow. She was a head taller than Asuka, with pale, translucent skin, high, imperious cheekbones, and a general "fuck you too" ready in her eyes. Asuka's gaze slipped to the lines etched in Ruth's neatly shaved hair, that graceful outline of a bird taking flight. Selasphorus heloisa, a bumblebee hummingbird, Ruth's favorite bird. And did the person who had traced the shape with the razor know that? Did she know why? "You seem stressed, Asuka," Alpha said. "Would you like to talk about it?" Someone was sobbing. Asuka felt that old, childish urge to just run away, to climb a tree, to something. She reached for the subcutaneous button at her temple, but her door was out of whack. "If Becky's dead, who's captain?" Ruth asked. "I think that would be me," said Yue, like she hoped she wasn't. When the mission was assembled, leadership had been a careful political balancing act between the two biggest nation sponsors. The agreement was that the captain and first vice captain would be American and Chinese, order to be determined by performance instead of leadership exercises. The Chinese weren't happy when Becky won the captaincy, but Yue had told everyone she was relieved. And now Becky was dead. "That's right. Yue is the captain," said Alpha. Yue covered her mouth with her hands. She generally had the bad posture of a tall person trying to take up less space, and now she slumped like she was trying to disappear, which was difficult given how big she was in her third trimester with twins, a fact that made her a hero and source of envy. A bruise was forming on her cheekbone. "I should go to the bridge. Ruth, can you take Susie to medical?" "What should we do?" someone called. "Just anything. Stop crowding in here, okay?" "I feel great," lied Asuka, who did not want to go anywhere with Ruth. Damn that she had to stop in the middle of that sentence to duck a wave of pain. "Consider it an order," said Yue, but it sounded like a question. Her large eyes were even bigger than usual, so white was visible all the way around brown irises so dark they were almost black. She exited counterspin, walking as fast as an extremely pregnant person possibly could, which was less dramatic than the occasion seemed to call for. "Okay, let's go." Ruth reached out and took hold of Asuka's elbow. She felt the tickle of Ruth's bony fingers, and then the white beach returned. The bow and stern side exterior airlocks had transformed into strange metal doors in the side of a dune. On the top of one of the handles perched a large black karasu. It cocked its head at her, and in its beak was something. Asuka stepped toward it and pulled free of Ruth. The beach disappeared. "What's wrong?" Something was off with her door. That's what was wrong. Which, in the broader context, was a ridiculous thing to complain about. "It's fine. Let's go." They moved through the airlock that led to the next module in the habitat wheel. Ruth's hot pink prosthetic leg clinked against the floor. It was strange to see the Phoenix without door. Asuka hadn't spent a minute in vanilla reality since waking up from hibernation almost a year ago. The walls were austere white, with only a small nameplate affixed to the doors on either side, describing each module that lay beyond with a word and colored symbol. Otherwise, each section of passageway was like the last. The ceiling was much lower than she realized, a little over 2 meters tall. Exposed white pipes and bundled electrical wires ran along the walls and ceiling. Without door, the ship felt industrial, unfinished. The ship was constructed of modules manufactured on Earth and joined together in space. The ring itself was composed of 13 narrow passageway sections and 3 larger chambers filled with green plants. They are agricultural modules, or agmods. The rest of the modules were attached to the stern or bow-facing sides of the ring. From the outside, the wheel resembled a jeweled bracelet, or a complicated organic molecule. Inside, without door, it felt like a never-ending sloping corridor. In Asuka's door, this would have been a flat trail through woods, a creek trickling to the left around here, fluorescent green weeds growing in patches of sunlight. Just that color made her ache for home sometimes. Not home. For a point in space-time she could no longer reach. She ducked around a protruding bulkhead that should have been a tree. The doors between the modular passageway sections were usually opened by default, but the emergency must have triggered all the airlocks to shut, so they had to stop to manually reopen each one as they went. Poor Yume, Ruth said, because she could never stand to say nothing. Yume? There were a lot of people to feel sorrier for, starting with the ones who were dead. She didn't even want to be first vice captain. You know how she is. Asuka didn't. Kind, hates confrontation. They passed into the next module. The door on the left was marked nursery. The one on the right, toilet. The selection committee wasn't wrong. How can you, of all people, say that? Asked Ruth, and Asuka flushed, because Asuka was the one whom the committee hadn't picked, the alternate. Asuka supposed Ruth meant it in a nice way, maybe, but it stung to be reminded that people thought of her like that, as if Asuka needed reminding. Everyone on this ship had a special rule, from ship maintenance to agriculture to navigation. Ruth was one of the 3 crew who managed the Phoenix communications with Earth. Asuka's specialty was nothing. Asuka slammed the next airlock button with her palm, felt the satisfying wrongness where the skin lacked sensation. You chose this, she reminded herself. They passed by crew quarters C and D. An envelope materialized in front of her, and she frowned. So all the mundane parts of her DAR, communication with Alpha and others, were working, just not the broader reality she lived in. The envelope hung there, cream-colored and textured like fine, expensive stationery. If she reached out, the words would unfurl, but it was from her mother. She brushed it away. "Don't you want to read that?" Alpha asked, sensing her dismissal in the movement of the smart fabric woven into her clothes. "This is the 3rd message you have received from your mother." "Not now, Alpha." "She must be worried about you." "I said, not now." Ruth caught up with her. She reached for Asuka's arm again. "Hey, wait up. You should take it easy." "I'm fine. Just following orders." Pain stabbed behind her eyeballs. They stepped to the side as crew hustled past, pushing a maintenance cart. Ruth said, "You're still hung up on it, aren't you?" Asuka gaped at Ruth. "God, Asuka, it makes my heart hurt watching you continue to beat yourself up over it." Oh, this was so Ruth, sinking her teeth into a subject and bringing it back up after they'd clearly moved on. "Are we talking about you dropping me, or me not getting selected? Both of those being my favorite topics, by the way." Ruth stopped in her tracks. She fastened her brown eyes on Asuka and put her fists on her waist. The birthmark over her left eye accentuated her anger. A blue vein under the translucent skin of her forehead bulged, and Asuka suppressed her involuntary affection for that vein. What the hell? I don't even know what to say, except that you hold a grudge longer than anyone I have ever met in the entire universe. Just the galaxy, surely. The next door opened with a whoosh to reveal one of the large agricultural modules, Agmod A. Even without door, it felt relatively spacious, its 3-meter ceilings packed high with shelves full of plants. Wow. Asuka Hoshino Silva, you are so... Asuka was saved from an enumeration of her most annoying qualities by a muffled cry for help. Agmod A was a wreck. The normally even rows of green plants stacked floor to ceiling were in disarray, and dirt was strewn across the white-tiled floor. A moist, earthy smell filled Asuka's nose, with a hint of rose and crushed mint. The cry came from somewhere to the left, behind the first row of shelving units. "Hurry," said Ruth. "I am!" A shelving unit of seedlings had tipped over, trapping someone underneath. They braced themselves on either side and heaved. Ruth squatted and began brushing the little sprouts off the person they had rescued. The person was Gabriella Ota, a petite woman with a normally sunny disposition. Like Asuka, she was half Japanese, but Gabriella had been picked to represent her other half, the Philippines. She could sing the entire Wagner ring cycle from start to finish, and she was fluent in Mandarin, Tagalog, Spanish, and English, and Japanese, which pained Asuka, whose Japanese was only basic at best, though better than her Spanish. Asuka sometimes wondered why Japan needed her when they had Gabriella, but Gabriella joked, "Two hafu made a whole." Despite Gabriella's normally relentless cheerfulness, Asuka liked her. She'd been grateful to be assigned a bunk below Gabriella's in crew quarters B, and though they were on different day cycles, they often chatted as Asuka was going to bed and Gabriella was getting up. They freed her from the shelving unit, and Gabriella sobbed, clutching her face. "Are you okay?" Ruth knelt next to her, voice husky with concern, and Asuka gritted her teeth because Gabriella was her friend. Even with blood trickling down her face from a cut above her eyes and minimal DAR augmentation, Gabriella was beautiful. Heart-shaped face, full lips, and long eyelashes. She was a programmer, but also a fantastic cook. She must have come to Agmod A to harvest microgreens when the spin disruption from the explosion knocked everything over. Now, she lay on the floor in a spreading pool of water and soil, plants littered around her. She curled into a fetal ball. Her voice was stifled by her hands. "Did I kill them?" "Wait, what?" "Oh, the planets. They're fine," Asuka said, which was not completely a lie. She surveyed the fragile things, roots thinner than a cat's whisker, leaves half crumpled and brutalized by the fall. "I'm so sorry," Gabriella said. Ruth coaxed her to a sitting position. Asuka hurried to grab her other arm. Reality transformed into a lush garden with tall palm trees and smooth paved walks, and all over every surface and circling in the air were thousands of blue California scrub jays. Which was wrong. Palm trees, maybe, but this was too tropical to be California, and they didn't usually walk like this. Asuka let go in surprise and fell back again into the plain white ship. Had she knocked her head worse than she realized? Ruth didn't seem to notice, or need her help. Annoyed, Asuka began collecting sprouts, if only for Gabriella's sake. Amazing how they could trust their future to such fragile things. She examined a bent seedling, trying to decide if it was salvageable. "Don't move." Ruth dabbed at the blood on Gabriella's face with her sleeve. "I'm okay." Asuka picked up a tray that had fallen on the floor and placed the sprouts in it. Her head throbbed. Asuka took a deep breath, seeking calm from the scent of wet dirt. "Don't," Gabriella said. Asuka turned, stung by the unusual sharpness in her tone. I'll do it." Blood rushed to Asuka's cheeks. What? Did Gabriella not trust her to care for a bunch of plants? It wasn't rocket propulsion. It wasn't even systems repair, both of which Asuka was capable of handling. Probably. She dropped her hands and turned away. "Let's take you to medical," she heard Ruth murmur. No, said Gabriella. "It's not a discussion." Her old friend always got her way, even if it meant shoving everyone along. In this case, literally. In a minute, Ruth had Gabriella up and moving. A peevish thought struck Asuka, that she'd been forgotten. She was ready to add this to the hairy grudge that lurked within her just for Ruth. But then Ruth glanced back. "Hurry up?" This was why she was better off without Ruth. "Would you like to read the message from your mother now?" "Nope." Ruth and Gabriella were talking in hushed tones. She heard them as if through a fog. Asuka wanted to tell Gabriella the bumblebee hummingbird was once the smallest bird in the world. Ruth had seen one of the last ones in the zoo when she was 6, her nose leaving a smudge on the glass. She wanted to unlock its cage, but her dads explained it was too precious to be free. It could not be trusted to survive in the wild. Later, during the conflict, the zoo took a direct hit, and many of the animals died, including the birds. Ruth said to her dads, "See, if I had..." But if wasn't real, and hummingbirds were extinct. Ruth swept them along, and Asuka didn't know whether to cry or laugh with how, even now, when she hated the woman, she loved her too. As they exited, Asuka thought she saw a flash of blue, like a bird perched on the battered shelving unit. She stopped to look back, but there was nothing. Chapter 9. Scrub jays were extremely intelligent, capable of caching and finding again thousands of nuts, seeds, and insects for the future. They even deployed strategies to protect their stash from being discovered, including moving their food from one location to another mid-season. The behavior demonstrated incredible spatial memory. It also suggested the ability to plan, once assumed unique to people. Chapter 10. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch, 0 cycles after explosion. B to C shifts. The medical mod overwhelmingly smelled of disinfectant and that insidious, delicate lavender scent that contaminated everything. Seriously, who thought it was a good idea to stock a ship with only one kind of soap? Ruth was gone, back to her post on the bridge, and Gabriella departed with an adhesive patch across her forehead and a dreamy, heavy-lidded, drugged expression. Without Dar, the module felt cramped, though functional. Nothing inside betrayed its proximity to the kitchen and dining mods. The walls were lined with compartments that held fine instruments and machines, and in the middle, there was a surgical table folded up into a recliner for a gynecological procedure. Asuka's stomach clenched when she saw it. She gingerly took a seat. The soft roll of cloth bunched beneath her thighs. She leaned back and counted to 10. A soft bell told the change from B to C shift. The small ship accommodated an 80-person crew by dividing everyone into 3 staggered cycles, and each 24-hour cycle into 3 8-hour shifts: A, B, and C. Asuka worked during B, exercised and studied during C, and slept during A. The explosion had happened during the sleep shift of the C shift medic, Hao Yu. They'd leapt out of bed and run over to medical to help. All the medics were working. The rest were out checking crew module by module, leaving Hao Yu to staff the clinic for any incoming issues. Hao Yu exuded calm, despite everything. This was why everyone loved Hao Yu, except maybe Asuka, who dreaded them, because nothing good ever came of her visits to the clinic. Asuka envied the other crew members' confidence. Hao Yu never had to doubt they'd get picked for the mission. The Chinese government had picked them out of hundreds of millions, started training them for the admissions test as soon as Even Star was announced. And how nice, Asuka thought, to never have a doubt. To be smart enough to know you were smart enough, that you were meant to be a part of this and not a backup plan. How are you, Susie? Fine. Really? Said Alpha. Alpha thinks you have a concussion. Hao Yu's fingers brushed Asuka's chin, feather-light. Bright yellow slashed Asuka's eyes like an afterburn, then was gone. They shone a light in one eye and then the other, and Asuka winced, headache kicking up a notch. A new round of nausea caught her, and she had to inhale a few times to keep from throwing up. Hao Yu was oh so gentle, tiptoeing around as if the whole difficulty getting pregnant thing was something for Asuka to cry about every time she climbed up on the exam table. Asuka didn't cry. Not that she felt great about it, just another way she fell short of the high Even Star standards. The mission was structured such that they were in hibernation during the first and last thirds of the voyage, given the length of the journey. In the 10-year interstitial period, all the crew were expected to give birth to and raise 1 to 2 children, so that they would arrive at Planet X with the most intensive stages of child-rearing behind them. Problem was, prolonged chemically induced hibernation was new, and its impact on aging and fertility was inconclusive, as Asuka was learning. It must have been awful out there. Hao Yu pulled instruments from the sterilizer drawer. Their nails were beautiful, tapered and neatly filed, no bitten cuticles. How did they keep them so nicely manicured? Was there some secret manicure club that Asuka didn't know about? Probably. My DAR has been glitching, said Asuka, not wanting to get into her feelings right then, or maybe ever. Ryu's had said before heading off, "It's all going to be okay." And Asuka's old irritation resurfaced. Because what gave that woman the right to be so confident? Hao Yu dropped a probe with a loud clang. Hi-ha. They retrieved it, put it back in the sterilizer drawer, and closed it without taking anything. They turned back to Asuka and leaned in again, so they were eye to eye. Asuka squirmed as Hao Yu probed her skin with their fingers. Flashes of yellow light again, like warm afternoon sun piercing a canopy of leaves. Gone again when Hao Yu removed their soft fingertips. Your face looks okay. No swelling. The helmet had protected her that much, at least. Let's see what's happening on the inside. Hao-Yu unboxed mobile scanners on a counter along the wall by the door. As they fumbled with them, Asuka realized that Hao-Yu's hands were shaking. She felt strangely betrayed. "I'm sorry," said Hao-Yu. They tried and failed to laugh, re-gripped the scanners. "Do you need a minute?" Asuka asked. "No, Hao-Yu wiped an eye with the back of their arm. "I'm okay." They sniffed and wiped their other eye, then pressed the scanners against Asuka's temples. A three-dimensional image appeared in the air above Hao-Yu's elbow as they scanned. Asuka's skull, her brain, the delicate blood vessels. "What do you think, Alpha?" "Confirmed. You have a concussion." "Not to worry," Hao-Yu faltered, then soldiered on. "We will have you better in no time." They moved back to the drawers and prepared a syringe loaded with nanos. "Hao-Yu, are you—" "Don't!" Hao-Yu said, voice spiking. "We just need to get through this, okay? Okay. It's going to be fine." Asuka watched them close the distance with the syringe. She was struck by how young Hao-Yu was, how young they all were. Only in their 20s, assuming hibernation didn't count. And what did any of them know about anything? She tipped her head back, hoped Hao-Yu was steady enough for the job. The needle went up her nose. Sunlight again. Was it a small golden butterfly resting on Hao-Yu's shoulder? And a prick of pain that made her flinch. Then it was over, and that place was gone again. Hao-Yu went to the pill printer. "Can I give her some headache meds, Alpha?" "Approved. 1,200 milligrams." They returned, 2 pills cupped like a promise. "Here you go. 1 now, 1 before sleep. Diagnostics didn't find anything wrong with your implant, by the way." Their fingers touched Asuka's palm as they passed her the pills. A garden bloomed around them, surrounded by old stone walls covered in ivy. In the distance was a castle that was flying blue and red pennants. "Wait," Asuka said, grabbing Hao-Yu's wrist. "I can see flowers, but they aren't mine." A small green caterpillar climbed up the stem of a large flower an inch from Asuka's nose. She inhaled instinctively, like any of this was real, and the air in her lungs wasn't canned. "You can see Alliridon?" asked Hao-Yu. "Alliridon? You know, like the fantasy game. It's my dar." Asuka frowned. "How come I can see your dar just fine, but then when I try to load mine, it's upside down and purple?" "Your implant must be buggy. Check with programming." They squeezed Asuka's hand. "Also, this isn't a today thing, but you should think about cutting back on spacewalks. It can't be good for your reproductive organs." "Not a chance." Asuka started to scoot, but Hao-Yu added brightly, "Well, since you're here, shall we do our business with your down there?" How humiliating, Asuka thought, to hear her body parts referred to euphemistically like that, to hear them referred to at all. "I figured we'd wait until the next round." The medical team did a new round of insemination for 6 crew every 40 cycles to stagger pregnancy. Asuka had started in round 1, and they were in round 7 now. "Oh no. Alpha's orders. New round starts next cycle anyway." "That's right. Kat had said she was scheduled for an appointment." "It will only take 5 minutes," Alpha said. "We'll just check if conditions are favorable, alright?" It was not alright, damn it. But Asuka sat back again. She closed her eyes in her dar. This would have been a big relief tent, with boxes full of clothing and stressed-out volunteer doctors checking on patients and cots. And in the distance, the rows of tents that were home. Her brother Louis kicking around an old soccer ball. "Do you have any siblings back home?" Haoyu asked, making conversation. "No," said Asuka, because thinking of Louis made her want to tear down the Illyridon sky. Haoyu beamed. "Well, look at that. Good thing we checked. You're perfect." "But I'm not," thought Asuka. "Or I wouldn't be here, trying again." She resisted the urge to run out. Stifling a groan, she lay back against the table, butt at the edge, and propped her feet in the stirrups. 3 pictures of sperm donors appeared in front of Asuka. Not all Japanese, which was new. Had she exhausted all the options with her multiple attempts? Impossible. Instead of picking, she hit the randomizer. She hated this. Oh, did she? Her eyes fell on the storage panels above where Haoyu was now removing a small test tube. The Phoenix carried sperm from thousands of donors, all stored in the sealed upper cabinets. Tracking was critical for ensuring maximum genetic diversity, and a lock minimized the chance of someone mixing up samples. Asuka frowned. The metal door appeared dented and patched. She wouldn't have noticed if her DAR had been on. "What happened?" Haoyu followed her gaze. Asuka wondered if they knew what she was referring to, but Haoyu shut the sample dispenser hatch with a clang. "Accident." They came back to Asuka with a test tube. "You're welcome to use my DAR, if you'd like. Beats having to stare at the white walls." "Oh," said Asuka, flushing. Sharing someone's DAR felt intimate, but anything was better than nothing. Haoyu offered Asuka a copper key. Asuka reached out hesitantly, and the garden reappeared. The sun shone, and she felt her shoulders loosen. She was reclining on a stone bench. In the distance, she saw a blue unicorn canter across a field. "That's better, isn't it?" Haoyu smiled. "Okay, now relax." Asuka tensed. It was nothing against Haoyu. It had everything to do with that test tube. No, a burnished bronze vessel or something they were holding. "Try to think of something else," Alpha said. "Shall I read you your mother's letters?" "No," Asuka snapped. Haoyu froze. "Sorry, not you, Alpha." "All right. I can see you're not in the mood. How about some interesting facts about the acorn woodpecker?" In spite of herself, Asuka's lips twitched into a smile. Alpha knew how to get her. The acorn woodpecker had a red crown, black back, tail and eyes, and a white face. It was renowned for its remarkable tendency to breed cooperatively. Asuka watched the blue unicorn. A dark shadow passed across the grass. A cloud, maybe? No, it was an enormous dragon, as big as a house. She heard Haoyu uncap a test tube, no matter what her eyes told her. Dip the little sticky thing down and stir. She wondered why Haoyu was so enamored with that particular fantasy game. A beautiful, dystopian world full of dragons and cursed weapons, overgrown, dilapidated castles, and empty hut after empty hut, as if a plague had come through and turned everyone to dust in an instant. Dozens of birds would raise the chicks together. Not all of them participated in reproduction. Asuka moved her fingers in the silent reply to Alpha. "Are you comparing us to woodpeckers?" "I'm a computer program, Asuka. You know I do not understand metaphors." She closed her eyes. She didn't like acorn woodpeckers. Sometimes they'd destroy each other's eggs as they laid. Sometimes they'd eat the remains. Even the mothers would partake. There were fingers in her vagina, and the cold feeling of an object penetrating her. She gritted her teeth. I'm in a magic kingdom. Everything is fine. Sharp pressure. She couldn't attach her thoughts to Alpha's voice anymore. Tried to think of something else. Cat. The explosion. No. No. Asuka opened her eyes. And the dragon was a bird. Wait. Is that a cuckoo? With the light gray head, orange-rimmed eyes, long dark tail, and a striped body. In the distance it seemed normal-sized, except it had to be massive. And it was... oh God! It was eating the blue unicorn. Asuka made a weird squeaking noise. All done, said Hao-Yu. Great job, Asuka, Alpha said. Hao-Yu followed Asuka's gaze. Oh, don't worry. That's Al, my dry-horned dragon. Asuka blinked, and sure enough, it was a dragon. The blue unicorn cantered about, unharmed. What'd I get? She asked. A billionaire donor, Nobel Prize winner, or random lottery person? Hao-Yu checked the label. 5-time Olympic gold medalist. Sprinter, I think. Asuka thought. Maybe this time. Better not to hope. Sorry to waste their shot. It's okay. Plenty more where that came from. Hao-Yu placed the bronze vessel in an ornate wooden box. You have to have optimism. Right, said Asuka, pulling up her underwear. The first time, she had walked out of the exam room already thinking of Japanese baby names. She imagined the media frenzy back in Tokyo. Aiko, maybe. Her little love. Because she would have loved it, if it had been real. After this, it's time to start considering other options. Hao-Yu's words were light. A violet butterfly settled in their hair, which was long and crowned with pearls. They smiled at Asuka's expression. Come on, it's not that bad. We're equipped with dozens of contingency procedures for this type of situation. Asuka touched her abdomen, as if she could prod her body to do its job. Other options. Okay. She would grit her teeth and do what was asked. She thought again of Kat, caught on the unlucky end of the blast. The door opened, and Asuka and Hao-Yu both jumped. One of the other medics came in out of breath. Did you see on the feed? Whatever happened knocked us off course. She rifled through a drawer and began stuffing sterilized bandages into her kit. Asuka remembered then how the stars had seemed wrong. A change in how they moved, and only black space behind them. Cold fear began to wash over her toes, ankles, knees. Because of course they were off course. For every action, a reaction. There had been an explosion, Cat blown one way, the Phoenix blown another. Perhaps infinitesimally, but at the speed they were going, a feather of an error was an ostrich of a problem. And if they didn't fix it, they would never reach Planet X. Oh, said Hao-Yu. That's not good. We can fix that though, right? Asuka asked, thinking of how many things couldn't be fixed. Cat's boot, tumbling into the dark. The medic refilled a bottle of clear liquid from a dispenser. Don't know. Everyone is freaking out, naturally. And Yume says, remain calm? She made a fart noise. We'll figure it out, said Hao-Yu. I don't know if Yume's up to this. She'll be better than McMahon. The other medic gave Hao-Yu a long look, then zipped her bag shut. I forgot how you felt about McMahon. What did that mean? Hao Yu's face was blank again, save for an eye twitch. Asuka toggled the public feed, and message after message scrolled from garden to cloudless sky. What are we going to do? Tamata! Mission Control has a contingency plan, right? Asuka felt queasy. A message from Yue appeared in her queue. Can you come to the bridge, please? The dragon's face shimmered, and for a moment, she swore it was a cuckoo again. But no. Even so, she shed a lyridon as she went out the garden gate. It felt like a bad omen. Chapter 11. USA, 11 years before launch. They lived in the refugee camp for 2 years, until a couple of folks passed away during a heat wave, and there was finally an outcry about the conditions they were living in. It was shameful, people said. Mom said, as if people haven't lived like this before in America. Then, like that, the camp was broken up and dispersed in a matter of hours. And all there was left of those 2 long years were the discarded cans and faded chalk lines marking their place in the world. They were bused several hours to an old hotel at the outskirts of the city that had beds with white sheets and a cool pool, green and small. Let's wait until later, when everyone is asleep, whispered Lewis, seeing how crowded it was. He gestured to his new headgear. We should use DAR. Pretend we're in 0G. Like all bad ideas, it seems like an excellent one. Asuka agreed, even though she was thinking there was no way she'd get in a pool again. That night, when Lewis poked her arm and tried to get her to come, she pretended to be asleep. It wasn't hard. In fact, after he tiptoed out and the door snicked shut, she found she couldn't open her eyes. She was that tired. She could feel the darkness outside beyond the hum of the lukewarm air conditioning. She lifted her mother's arm and snuggled deeper into the cave between her mother's soft body and the crumpled bed sheets. Years later, she would dream of that night. She would try this time to get up. Sometimes she would even make it halfway down the stairs before she fell asleep. She never made it to the pool. Don't, she mumbled, but he didn't hear. Let's not. And sometimes, she dreamed that she watched from the sky as Lewis sank down below the clear water, eyes shut, like somewhere he was dreaming too. And she needed to remind him he couldn't breathe underwater, that Dar wasn't real. But he couldn't hear her, and she was flying backward, away and up, to outer space, past Mars, where he had always wanted to go, where now he would never go. Chapter 12. The Phoenix, 3,980 cycles after launch, 0 cycles after explosion, C-shift. A full-force shouting match was raging in the bridge, and Asuka resisted the urge to cover her ears and walk back out. Nobody had even noticed her come in. Without Dar, the bridge resembled a small, mundane conference room, with a table that unfolded from the floor in an ingenious way. Ruth sat in front of the walkie, bent over, reading messages from Earth, furiously tapping out replies. 8 officers, including Yue, huddled around a projection. Black filled the space above the table, with green dots for stars and a red dotted line charting their course. At least Asuka could still see the public Dar augmentations. There was the star from which they'd come, and there was the star that would be their new sun. The Phoenix moved imperceptibly between the two, across a distance that reduced their solar system to a blip. Except the dotted line that was their projected course now pointed definitively past their destination. And judging from the shouting and finger jabbing at the projection, the officers were as freaked as the crew. There was no plan. "Shit," said Asuka. They noticed her. Ruth's eyes flicked over to her once, then away. Her fingers paused, scrolling through the messages. It was her off shift, but not surprising that the other communications specialist had asked Ruth to cover. She had been close with Winnie, the communications specialist responsible for A shift, who was dead. "What's happened now?" said AM, their French chief propulsion officer. They were Asuka's height, with thick, short brown hair that stood up on their head an inch, and the dense, muscled upper body of a former international youth wrestling champion. There was the pale shadow of facial hair along their pronounced jaw, like they'd missed a shave, and 3 diamond-encrusted pins pierced their right eyebrow. Some of it was Dar body augmentation, but the tattoo of an old-fashioned QR code under one eye was real. AM was the kind of take-charge person whose constant certainty on a good day was like a fire hose. On a bad day, it was a comfort. Growing up, AM had been notorious for their hot temper. Once, Asuka had seen them throw a glass of milk in another kid's face for making fun of their accent. But when Asuka expressed sympathy, AM had given her a look sort of like the one they were giving now, to "Why are you even here, Claire?" "I need to talk to her," said Yingyue. "About what?" Yingyue hesitated. Whatever it was, she didn't want to say. "Captain's business," Yaz answered for her, wielding the consonants of captain like a knife. Yasmin Dogan was Yingyue's deputy for bot and drone operations, and the one who had restored the ship's spin to normal earlier. Yaz was tall, with muscular thighs and thick, dark eyebrows. She was further along with her pregnancy than anyone on board, including Yingyue. "And speaking of business, can we finish here so I can get back to mine, which is fixing this ship?" Which set off a new round of bickering. "St." Ruth waved Asuka over. "Do you know how to operate the walkie?" Sure. In theory. She hadn't touched a walkie since training. She joined Ruth at her station. "Great, because I need a bio break." Asuka glanced at the others. "Oh, no. They don't lower themselves to operating a walkie," Ruth said, quietly enough that only Asuka could hear, but just that quietly. The air between the two of them felt brittle. "They're stressed because we have a limited amount of somanol." Somanol was the drug that induced hibernation. "And we have a finite amount of power to keep our hapatite cycling without solar power." No power meant no temperature regulation, no clean water, no ag or hydroponics. Asuka didn't like where this was going. "If we don't get back on course in the next 2 cycles, we'll die before we get to Planet X." Asuka swallowed hard. "Here, I'll show you how we send a message to Mission Control." Ruth vacated the chair, and Asuka sat down in front of the walkie. The interstellar communication device was a black, featureless box strapped into a nest of soft foam. Above it floated several windows in Dar, each with a text streaming down. The most recent transmissions flickered across in rapid succession. Panicked notes from loved ones, reams of news bulletins about the mission, about events on Earth, clipped and delivered by Mission Control. And there, a message from Mission Control. "Whoa. The message said they were evacuating Houston, where Mission Control was headquartered, because of a Category 4 hurricane, and that, oh yeah, by the way, the US president had announced retaliatory naval action in the Sea of Japan, which meant the mission's two biggest nation sponsors, the United States and China, were basically at war now. Retaliation against what? Asuka didn't know. Spicy, Kat had said. Understatement. Just the prelude to the end of the world, said Ruth. How did this happen? Asuka asked, trying to fathom it. When they had left, their mission had been hailed as a voyage of peace, the thing that would unite the nations of the world. Most of the world leaders had stood on stage together with them at launch, and Becky and Yue threw arms around each other for the cameras. The American president had said, "Now we know what can be achieved if we all work together." Welp, so much for that. The usual exchange of words, saber-rattling, machismo, escalation of force on both sides, a plane accidentally shot down, reactivation of old US bases in the Pacific, Japan, Vietnam, Philippines, and South Korea, then a move to annex Taiwan. Shit. The bright red text scrolled across Asuka's field of vision. Her eyes watered from staring too hard at the headlines. Does this affect the mission? I'd say they might be distracted right now. A lot of countries are taking sides. It's only a matter of time before Russia joins in. My friend at Mission Control, of course she had a friend at Mission Control. Ruth had friends everywhere. Says Linda is searching for a neutral country to host them, but the US is putting a lot of pressure right now to relocate to Cape Canaveral and eject the Chinese members of Mission Control. Asuka swiveled towards the officers behind them. Do you know? Ruth shrugged. Yep. Didn't you see the comments Yue posted to the entire crew on the public feed? Actually, no. Asuka kept it muted. It was all about maintaining unity, blah blah. AM didn't like that. Felt communication needs to be managed. And Yue is fueling more chaos. Not wrong, IMHO. You know, every time I think it's impossible for the world to get any worse, more stuff happens. That's the lesson. There is no bottom. And does it make it better or worse that we left it all behind? Her sigh smelled like the ship-printed mints. Asuka swallowed. Better, right? Her former friend's expression was unreadable. Have you checked in with your mom yet? Asuka broke her gaze. Anyway, I really do need a pee. That's the walkie key? Ruth pointed at a small metal rod, chained to and resting on top of the box. I know, muttered Asuka, picking it up. You put it in that slot. The key slid into the slot, and a floating, compose new message window appeared. What did they say? Yue called. Do they have instructions? Ruth flicked through another window of scrolling text faster than Asuka could track, and stopped and pointed with one finger. No, but they've assembled an international team of experts. Including both China and the US? Asked Yue. For now. Yue's shoulders relaxed a fraction. After Ruth stepped out, Asuka asked if she should send a reply. Send them our current resource stats. Yue wriggled her fingers, and a stream of data appeared tagged in front of Asuka. Asuka dropped the data into the window and hit send, then waited for the quantum walkie to process the message one letter at a time. The machine had a duplicate back on Earth. Designing and constructing it had cost a third of the entire mission budget, which was justified. Given the spectacular breakthrough in modern science it had required, it allowed what was long thought impossible: instantaneous data transmission across space. Not an efficient way to communicate, though, and insufficient for video or audio. "Would you like to tell your mom you were okay?" Alpha asked. "I'm sure she's heard by now." She imagined her mom rubbing her face with two hands, forehead contorted in worry. "Good. What about the rear engines?" Yue was asking. She was struggling to exert authority. The other vice captains kept speaking right over her. If only she didn't sound so tentative. It invited judgment. "They're not really meant to steer. The ship was built to go in a very fast, straight line," said AM. "We could, reposition them manually and risk blowing ourselves up. McMahon would never." "Well, McMahon's gone," snapped Yue, losing patience. "You got me." There was a kind of sick silence in the room. AM was leaning, face first, in the projection, their arm over their whole face, shoulders shaking. Yue looked stricken. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong. AM?" She touched their back, but AM lunged away. The officers gave AM a beat to collect themselves. It took only a moment. They turned around, face stitched together in an imitation of composure. The red dotted line of their trajectory blinked ominously between them. "And how?" AM bit out. "Do we know if we can even trust you?" The module chilled another 10 degrees in an instant. No one moved. Yue broke first, kneading her lower back with her fist. "What? I don't... What do you mean? We're all on the same side here." "Are we?" The door opened, and Ruth stopped at the threshold. "Did I miss something?" The walkie chirped. Another incoming message from Earth. "Restricted to Captain." It scrolled before Asuka's eyes, and she read it without meaning to. "Agree. Possible intentional act. Will investigate. Do the same." Asuka tried to swallow, but all the spit seemed to have dried out of her mouth. "Everything okay?" Ruth asked from behind Asuka's shoulder. Asuka jumped. The message had already diverted to Yue's inbox. "Fine." Behind them, Yue got to her feet. "Let's take a break." She gestured for Asuka to follow her into the passageway. "First, how are you doing?" she asked Asuka when they were alone. "Okay," even though Yue's sympathy punctured something in her and made her want to cry. "What do you need?" "I'm sorry to make you relive this, but I want you to see something." The fact that she would apologize marked another difference between Yue and their previous captain. Yue projected a view from Asuka's helmet, and it was like Asuka was there all over again, in her seat. Asuka tensed as she watched, following Cat outside, Asuka's voice proposing a race, Cat saying sure, Cat speeding off, faster even with the toolkit. "I know I shouldn't have," Asuka began. "Stop. You can't blame yourself for what happened." Yue skipped ahead. Asuka was now climbing up the side of the wheel. Cat said, "Where did you say it was, Yue?" "Hang on, I'm caught on something." "Okay, but I'm telling you." And then this was when she froze the view right as Asuka glanced over, and the explosion began. "What does that look like to you?" Yue said. "Intentional act," Mission Control had said. Yue rewound and switched to an exterior camera view. They re-examined the strange dark object on the hull. "You think that caused this?" "I think it was a bomb." "So, what? We came all this way with that strapped to the side of our ship and it just goes off now?" she realized, shouting, Or they had help from someone on the ship, said Yume. Asuka recoiled. They had trained 10 years, grown up together. No. Who could have done something like that? That's what I need you to figure out. Asuka felt unreasonably irritable. I'm sorry, but I missed the elective in how to investigate sabotage and murder. Yume crossed her arms. None of us knows how to deal with this. Please, Asuka, I need your help. Why me? You're the alt. Of course. Yume caught her expression and held up a hand. Because you don't have a regular assignment. No one will question if they see you poking around. And since you almost died today, you're one of the few people I trust right now. I assume you wouldn't have intentionally put yourself in harm's way. Asuka sighed. Also, keep this quiet. Yume looked at the door behind her. There's already enough fighting right now, when we need to be working together to get back on course. Only Yaz knows about this. Until we know who it was, be careful. You think something else is going to happen? Yume rubbed her belly. Her face was taut with worry. I don't know. But we're alive, aren't we? Asuka tried to imagine the planning it would have taken. Had someone infiltrated the mission 21 years ago? Or become radicalized along the way? She shivered. There were plenty of people who hated this mission and what it stood for. Men's rights groups, and Mac, and people like her mother's friends. Anyway, you can start in the dining mod. She patted Asuka's shoulder. A train rushed through countryside and then pushed past her to the bathroom, as if everything were settled. Asuka kicked the wall of the ship once, twice. Don't worry, Alpha said. It'll all work out. Funny, she thought. She didn't know Alpha could lie. Chapter 13. Japan. 11 years before launch. Asuka's worn American sneakers slapped against dirt road as she ran along the edge of the cedar forest that populated the overlooking hill. A chorus of insects began to sing to the late afternoon. They had come to Japan to escape Lewis, but his absence echoed in every tree and rock. The government gave them a house for free in the ghost village where her mom's grandmother lived. The town was mostly abandoned, so they had their pick. The house they took was built out of synthetic wood and concrete, all clean lines and cherry finishes. There were enough rooms for Mom and Papa to each have their own workspaces. In truth, the house was bigger than they needed. They were each of them suspended in too much space. The sunset over the rice paddies was beautiful in summer, if one could bear the heat and mosquitoes. The humidity sat over everything like a great fat toad, and the deep scent of wet moss and cedar pervaded every inch. It seemed to Asuka like the country might have been this way for centuries, and that even if the population and coastline continued to shrink and the smaller islands were swallowed by the sea, Honshu would continue on like this. Green shoots and water, mountains and trees, empty, rusted playgrounds, battered vending machines, and little stone shrines at the edge of the road. She'd forgotten what it was like to be in Japan. Home and not home at the same time. She wanted to want to belong, to sink her toes in the soil and feel the land recognize her. Give back the piece of her that she sometimes felt was missing when she was in America. She didn't feel it though. She felt lost. A karasu landed on the gutter of a roof and cawed. There were lots of birds in Japan. Not real birds, but actual birds. It was one of the upsides of a vanishing human presence. It smelled like wet soil, and there was a hint of sweetness in the air misting up from the bowed heads of wildflowers sticking out over the road. She went along this place that Louis had never been, and with each footfall she repeated his two names like a mantra. Rio for right foot, Louis for left. Rio, Louis, Rio, Louis, Rio, Louis. Linda Trembling, the richest person in the world, was creating an elite program to train a group of children to be the future crew of an interstellar mission, and Asuka had decided to apply, for Louis's sake. But Mom was dead against it, which was a problem, because she couldn't go without parental permission. In the meantime, Asuka was doing her best to prepare for the entrance exam, using the free prep materials, approaching the task with the same stubbornness that had gotten her into trouble so many times when she was younger. It was the hardest thing she'd ever tried to do in her life, but also far easier to think about than the wave that would knock her down if she thought too much about Louis. Mom was sitting on the porch, watching the automatic pickers tug rice seedlings from the ground, shake the dirt from their roots and bundle them. From here, the pickers looked like giant squid, robotic arms stretching, contracting. She held a box. Asuka-chan, I've been waiting for you. And for once, it didn't quite sound like a lecture. Asuka followed her mother down the steps and along the raised path that ran between the fields. Hora, hayaku, ikuyo. Where are we going? There. She pointed to a great cypress tree at the end of the road. The air was thick as soup, but it was marginally cooler under its branches. Mom set the box down and gently lifted the lid. What is it? Asuka asked. From the government. For every family with a child. Dusk collected with its customary gentleness. Asuka squatted down next to her mother. I don't get it, Asuka started to say. Shh. So they waited, and then 1, then 2, then 100 tiny twinkling lights drifted up and out of the box. Mom took Asuka's hand. It's a promise, she said. Someday, we will put things back the way they used to be. The insects, the trees, and all the birds. The tiny lights flickered as they spread out over the fields, and Asuka wanted it to be true. The shadows settled down around them. Your father is moving back to America, she said. He got a new job in Boston. Asuka searched herself for surprise, but since Louis had died, all endings felt predictable. Her mother's face was unreadable in the dark. I know it's been hard for you to fit in here, and that you want to apply for that program. I don't like it, but I've thought about it, and I have a deal for you. If you stay with me here in Japan, I'll let you apply. I'll even help you study for the exam. But if you don't get in, or you get in but you change your mind, I want you to promise to come back here, to me. Asuka swallowed. She thought she understood the choice. I want to go to Even Star. Okay then, her mother said. She touched Asuka's cheek. You know, all I want is for you to be safe and happy. Asuka didn't trust herself to speak. She felt the half moon of her mother's thumbnail against her cheek, her index finger under her chin. A straggler stopped on the edge of the box and then wandered over to Asuka. She caught it to get a better look. Its mechanical legs wiggled in protest, and its wings strained to fly. The bulb at the back of its butt flickered. Let it go. Asuka opened her hand and it flew away. It didn't matter that it wasn't alive. It would be there that evening, and for many evenings after. And for all Asuka knew, years later, somewhere in the water-soaked paddies at the foot of the mountains, there were still mechanical fireflies lighting up the sky. Perhaps they'd outlast the children they were made for. Chapter 14. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch. 0 cycles after explosion. Sea shift. It was like nothing had disturbed the white passageway that connected to the dining and kitchen mods, and that was enough to make Asuka's skin crawl. How could so much destruction have occurred on the other side without even knocking askew the neat, black and silver embossed placard on the door? 4 crew were there, prepping the compression suit for Asuka. Yang Yue had a message to Head that she was sending the alt to help retrieve the bodies, which was just, awesome. But you couldn't exactly say no in a crisis. She would be going in with Lala Williams, who was already suiting up for the dark vacuum-filled module beyond. Asuka remembered how she and Lala had been friends for 1 whole semester. Not best friends, but robotics partners. In fact, Lala was the reason Asuka hadn't failed out her first semester. But then what? They drifted apart, hadn't crossed paths much since. Lala was a bot engineer, and now, on ship, they worked together sometimes since they both were slotted for B shift. But that was it. Still, she felt the remnant of that brief, bright friendship sometimes, like finding the other sock at the bottom of your laundry. Also, Lala was dating Ruth. Asuka had heard that. As the crew helped Asuka suit up, she caught herself scrutinizing each of them, thinking, was it you? Did you do it? It was already beginning to eat at her, and she didn't like it. I was scheduled for a meal in the dining mod, one said. But Alpha told me to wait because the air sensors were going off again. Can you imagine? I would have died. Asuka frowned. The air sensors had been unreliable lately, but it seemed like a weird coincidence. You ever find that drill? Lala asked, as Asuka pulled on a compression suit for the second time that cycle. It took Asuka a moment to remember the missing drill she'd been searching for before the spacewalk with Kat. Was Lala joking? She was joking. Lala was tall and lean, full of tense energy. She had dark skin and a bright smile that revealed a crooked left canine tooth. It gave her an endearing cocky look. Story was, Evenstar had wanted her to fix it before launch, and she'd put up a fight. I changed enough of myself for you. I'm keeping my teeth. They let it go. Asuka's mom would have said Lala had that strong American girl spirit, like Asuka, which was not a compliment. Technically, Lala wasn't an American rep. Instead, she had earned one of the coveted wildcard spots. Asuka cricked her neck a few times, feeling okay now that the nanos and pain meds were kicking in. Better than okay. Something like a runner's high, which meant she'd feel like shit in a few hours, so better enjoy it while it lasted. Except now, all she could think about was, one of us did this. All right, Susie? Asuka jumped, but it was a crewmate asking from behind if the compression was too tight. Yeah. Okay then, said Lala, smacking gloved hands together. Let's get this over with. She was glaring sideways at the airlock door like she could kick it down, and dread crept over Asuka. Isn't there someone else? It was a selfish thought. She was not thinking that, no. Asuka shut her eyes a moment, bracing herself. The others exited the passageway, and the airlock sealed behind them. Her compression suit squeezed in all the sore and banged-up places, and her mouth was dry as the moon. It was dark in the module except for blue and red blinking emergency lights along the floor. Asuka turned on her headlamp, light playing about the room. Weird being in the dining mod without any augmentation. It should have been the Japanese restaurant her family used to go to for special occasions when she was very little. Tables and tatami floors, lacquer and ceramic bowls full of miso soup and rice and various delicacies. Quiet music and the murmur of conversation. Paper chopstick sleeves she could fold into shapes. Instead, it was a white box streaked with black charring and bits of furniture and warped dishes. Shadows danced across blue, then red walls. To the right was an airlock that led to the kitchen mod. It was sealed shut. The kitchen mod had sustained significant damage, but at least it didn't have a giant hole in its side. Yaz and her squad do quick work, eh? Said Lala, shining her headlamp on the hole. Already, the outer wall was scaffolded with ribbing. Through it, they could see the slow-moving stars. Little bots like flying spiders climbed about, building out the frame for the permanent hull patch. Asuka imagined the skittering clackety-clack of their hair-thin metal legs, but without atmosphere, they moved noiselessly. The room was designed with long communal tables and benches perpendicular to 2 serving counters along the wall adjacent to the kitchen mod. Ugh. Lala stood over the captain, who lay face down between the half-intact serving counter nearest the door to the passageway, body covered by a sheet of metal. The force of the blast must have knocked her down, which had kept her from being pulled out by the air suck that followed. What was she doing in the dining mod anyway? Asuka remembered the amplified, wet sound of McMahon chewing in her ear. Came down for a snack? McMahon didn't snack. The captain was disciplined to a fault. She set impossible standards for herself and expected everyone else to meet the same. Asuka joined Lala on the other side of the serving counter. The countertop had been blown off in pieces. They lifted the piece closest to the door. Underneath, Captain McMahon's body was twisted around the swell of her belly. Jesus, said Yue in her ear. She must have been watching through Asuka's feed. Lala said in a dead sort of voice, "Baby would have lasted longer than she did." An image of the fetus rose up in Asuka's mind, stunned under the force of impact, still sucking oxygen through the umbilical cord, until... A strangled cry crackled across the radio, then muted. "Sorry," said Lala after a moment, clearing her throat. Asuka felt herself going numb. Was looking anywhere else but down. There was a spray of blood on the floor, and bits of... Oh, no. Yes, small intestine flash frozen against the wall. "I may be sick." "Just breathe," said Lala, who sounded like she was hyperventilating herself. "I can see this is a stressful situation, but you're going to be okay," said Alpha. "Shut up, Alpha," said Lala, clearly responding to similar attempts by the AI to soothe her. Asuka stepped around the captain, trying to locate Winnie, who was also behind the serving counter. She remembered seeing legs when she'd peered in from outside. Beneath another piece of countertop, closer to the hole, Winnie lay curled in a fetal position. Even in pregnancy, her arms and legs were skinny. She was a small person, built for running long distances. She'd loved her ultramarathons, but she'd given all that up for the ultimate ultra across space. And here she was. She hadn't made it. It took Asuka a moment to process what she was seeing. Her body was missing from the chest up. Lala whispered a short prayer. Asuka felt as if her ears were full of cotton. Lala sagged against Asuka, casting a second slash of light across the woman. Words tumbled out of her. We were in the same conception round. She wanted us to name our babies matchy-matchy names. It would have been disgustingly cute. Lala sniffled, then squatted down by Winnie's feet and unfolded the body bag. Asuka bent down on the other side, both avoiding where her head used to be. Winnie's flesh was cold, even through insulated gloves. They shoved her into the bag and zipped it up. Better not to see her anymore. Remember, lift from your legs, or you'll wrench your back, Lala said, and Asuka felt a shrill, inappropriate giggle threatening to bubble up. They lifted, and Asuka was surprised by the solidity of Winnie, this small person who had moved like the wind on Earth. Don't think about it, said Lala, definitely thinking about it. Let's go. They carried Winnie into the passage, heavy and awkward in their arms. Asuka realized halfway that Lala was sobbing. The noise over-amplified through the helmet mic. Asuka wanted to beg her to mute, but thing was, she was crying too. As they set the bag down, she wished for her forest, or for green lawn and a cloud of sparrows settling into a cottonwood tree. For Winnie to get up, brush the dirt off old gym shorts, and ask if anyone wanted to go for a run. They leaned against the doorframe, gasping for air, trying to work up the courage to go back in. When I started cramping, blood on my thighs and stuff, I knew I'd lost mine. And after that I avoided her. It was too hard. Lala bowed her head. You don't know when you talk to someone for the last time. Asuka thought of Kat and how little she'd appreciated her. All right? Someone asked over the comm. How tempting to say no. Let someone else take over. Make it their problem and walk away. Yes, said Lala for both of them. Becky McMahon's arms stretched over her head, insubstantial in the dim blue light. Asuka squatted and glanced along the direction of her fingers. She had been reaching for the door, maybe, or hanging onto the handle by the side of the airlock. Asuka stepped around the frozen blood pooled on the floor around the captain's ears. I'm not sorry, said Lala, expression unreadable behind the faceplate of her helmet. Asuka started at the venom in her voice. What? Lala jumped as if she hadn't realized she had spoken aloud. Nothing. It's just... she wasn't a good person. Asuka had heard Lala had gotten into a fight with the captain, called her an evil racist bitch or something, right in the passageway for everyone to hear. She'd been confined to crew quarters for a cycle because of it. Asuka didn't know what it had been about. Was it anything to do with the reason McMahon was dead now? What do you mean? Asuka asked, dreading the answer. She liked Lala, and Lala was distraught about Winnie. There was no way it had been her. Lala's face blinked in and out of shadow, inscrutable. You know she was a Maquis, right? A Maquis was what people called a member of the militia for the American Constitution. Asuka thought of their neighbors in the camp, who were basically normal people, but Mac was also responsible for burning down the Michigan state capitol, for the resurgence of lynchings, for bombing a polling place in Ohio. They had gained strength in the last decade, with civil conflict raging in pockets all over the United States. She regarded the body between them. It seemed hard to imagine that even Star would have taken someone with that kind of affiliation, let alone made them a captain. How do you know? In answer, Lala squatted next to the body and yanked down the front of McMahon's shirt. Peeking over her right breast was the head of a black eagle. "What's going on in there?" Yume asked. Asuka bent quickly next to Lala and tried to push the captain onto her back. She flinched, thinking she'd felt the bones of the baby inside. Together, they lifted the captain, who was heavier than Winnie, and slid her into the bag. "So," said Lala, "you and Ruth have a drama?" "Nope." They'd navigated around the furniture. "What happened between you two anyway? You were best friends." Asuka hefted the captain's feet. "I don't know." A lump of self-pity lodged in her throat. She could have choked on it. "What did Ruth tell you?" "Nothing. That's why I've been dying to know." "People drift apart, I guess." "Sorry. Ruth complains I have no respect for privacy." "But what is privacy anyway?" They maneuvered toward the airlock. "You know, after the explosion, she ran straight from the bridge to rescue you. Some of the officers were upset about it." "Oh," said Asuka, surprised. "No one knew if you were alive because half the system was down, but she insisted on going out there to find you. She saved your life." Asuka didn't know what to say to that. They carried the captain through the airlock. "All done?" someone asked, as if there might be something more they could do. And what about Kat? Asuka thought, jaw tightening in grief. Already she was remembering things she hadn't seen. Kat's face, mouth forming the shape of Asuka's name, that she had cried for Asuka to help her. Asuka trembled. "The rest is on the wall," said Lala. "And I'm not your maid. That's what bots are for." She triggered the airlock door, sealing off the dining mod. Yume's voice came in via door. "Okay, send in the drones to, clean what's left." Asuka closed her eyes, thinking of another body, this one small, pale, stretched out by the side of a pool. The image shuddered in her brain like an old primitive movie. "What now?" Lala asked no one. The segment of passageway was repressurized. Lala had her helmet off, and the others were stepping over the body bags to help Asuka remove her suit. "Did you see anything?" Yume asked. "You're all right," Alpha said. So why did Asuka feel like she might drown? She was the one who did whatever was asked. But she couldn't do this thing for Yume. She couldn't. "Hey." It was a message from Chief Engineer Yaz, Yume's former second-in-command. "Need to show you something." Chapter 15. Cuckoos were experts at infiltration, laying their eggs in the nests of other birds to be raised by unwitting parents. They were particularly known for their impressive mimicry ability, producing eggs that resembled the host's eggs, speckled, small, brown, or white. Woe to the wagtail, shrike, or magpie who failed to notice. Chapter 16. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch, 0 cycles after explosion, sea shift. "Deploy on my mark," said Yaz. She stood, leaning two-handed against the back of a chair for balance. The ship chairs, now that Asuka looked at them unfiltered, were simply constructed. The back was curved pieces of unpainted metal bolted to a frame that was designed for durability more than comfort. She'd seen the same chairs in the bridge and in the dining mod, They were, it seemed, the exclusive chair of the Phoenix and, no matter what they looked like in Dar, notorious for contributing to a sore posterior. Likely worse if one was, like Yaz, in their third trimester and had been sitting in one for hours. The drone operations mod had a far wall covered in a concave screen, never used since people had Dar. Workstations were arranged in 2 half-circle rows facing this wall. There was a whiff of sweat not quite cycled out by the ventilation system. The drone ops crew had been working double since the explosion, and adrenaline had started to fade to exhaustion. She could see it in the slump of everyone's shoulders, in the rubbing of sore necks. Many were on their second shift, including Yaz. Drone Ops was responsible for keeping the ship in repair. The perfect place to be if you wanted to sabotage the ship. Asuka sneaked a glance around the crew. Okay, but what did suspicious behavior even look like? Since Asuka arrived, Yaz had said nothing about what she wanted to show her, just put her to work as if Asuka was there to help with the repair mission. It suited Asuka fine. At least she knew how to do this. Plug in? One of the team asked Asuka, offering her a splinter of driftwood. Yaz required everyone in her crew to share reality when on shift. Asuka's fingers passed through it, and the room transformed into the deck of an exquisite galleon with dark red sails that skimmed across the clouds several miles above the ground. It was raining, and not for the first time, Asuka wondered what Yaz had against sunshine. Asuka took her position, feet shoulder-width apart on the poop deck, poised before a wood-framed screen that was incongruously high-tech. A karasu came up along the galleon, wings beating. "I have that same bird in my Dar," she said to the crew member next to her. "What bird?" They didn't see the bird even though they were all sharing Dar. Weird. "Put us outside, Alpha," said Yaz. Then the karasu and gray sky disappeared, and the galleon was flying through space instead. Even now, Yaz didn't seem ruffled. The woman was steady as an atomic clock. She oozed competence through every pore. A diamond-encrusted ring hung from a long gold chain around her neck, a family heirloom passed down from her great-grandmother. Her mother had been a pilot in a women's air squadron during the last global conflict. At school, Yaz had worn a bulletproof vest like it was fashionable, and somehow, it was a point of awe rather than ridicule. For many, that global conflict would never be over, which was reasonable given the new one that had broken out. On my mark, Asuka focused on her controls. She had a squadron of 20 bots under her charge, each marked on her screen by an orange light and a charge meter. The microbots ran on batteries that lasted a couple of hours, but a number 4 in the corner of the screen indicated this was already the 4th wave of deployment since the explosion. "Go," said Yaz. The little bots deployed from a chute in the north quad, microscopic propulsion keeping them in synchrony with the habitat wheel. She pulled up the perspective of one of the bots. Then they were one with the drones outside, riding along the swarm through the dark. The control room was gone, and they were streaming through space toward the hole in the hull. The fisheye perspective made Asuka dizzy, but Yaz seemed to be enjoying herself. An involuntary grin stretched across her face. "Touchdown?" Yaz said. The drones reached the hole and began to attach and seal the temporary patch they'd laid down before, which looked like a piece of plastic sheeting, but much stronger. "Finish the scaffolding first, then start the plating. The patches we have in storage aren't big enough. We'll do fish scales. It will be okay." Asuka checked her little bots, building out the scaffolding like worker bees. "Do an extra layer of scaffolding there," Yaz said, pointing to her screen. "It's weak." "Copy," Asuka said. She transmitted the instructions. The little drones began to construct the ribs out of oblong blocks of metal, and Asuka imagined hearing them slide into each other like children's building toys. Snick, snick. The little guys were programmed to deal with small repairs in the hull, but this was much bigger than anything they'd ever had to handle. Still, the bots worked fast, rebuilding the frame, insulation, wiring, hull. Asuka felt a kernel of pride. Here was a test of the crew's extensive training, and everyone was doing what they were supposed to. Work continued, punctuated by anxious chatter. The bots fit little shingles of metal against the frame. She could see the sudden red heat of the solder. One day, they would build a brand new world like this, brick by brick, assuming they ever got there. Yaz pinched her bottom lip with 2 fingers, expression unreadable. There were 7 layers to the hull, all designed to protect them from radiation, to keep the ship's systems cycling, and insulated from the near-zero temperatures outside. Temperature regulation was powered by the enormous engines strapped to the nose and tail of their ship, which was better not to think about most of the time. Asuka switched her personal view to a tighter angle from the exterior cameras and watched the fibrous webbing thicken across the crude scaffolding they'd already laid. She wasn't 100% sure, but it seemed like the consistency wasn't quite what it should have been. She zoomed in closer. "Having some issues with my bots." Bots were getting snarled in the webbing, which shouldn't have happened. And from the sounds of it, she wasn't the only one. "Take these 4 offline," said Yaz, coming over and touching 4 of the orange lights that had gone rogue. "Bring them in for a program reset." There was cursing. Some bots had started messing with the good ones. "Spider fight," one crew confirmed. Yaz went over to someone else. "Take those offline too." "They're tangled. Can't bring them in." "Shut them off." The weave of microfibers was no longer a neat grid, but a traffic jam. "Can't!" Her technician's voice sounded stressed. "It's worse than last time." A full third of the bots weren't responding to commands now. It was weird. Very weird. Mierda. Yaz switched to one of the big bots. This one was named Petunia and was, among other things, a glorified space vacuum. She turned on the brush and moved it closer. Once in position, she made a fist. It began to swallow microbots whole, good along with bad. Order was restored in minutes. "That was awesome," someone breathed. "Keep working." Asuka heard a low grunt from Yaz. She was bent over, clutching her abdomen. After a moment, she straightened back up. "Take over Asuka's bots," she told one of her crew. Then she gestured for Asuka to follow her out into the passage. "What did you make of that?" said Yaz, walking one mod over to the Eam. "Was that normal?" "Ha! Alpha, open the hatch." Alpha obliged, opening the drones and bots' access chute next to the larger stern-facing airlock. Petunia rose up in a great bucket. Yaz flung it to the floor, removed its gullet, and began to pick out rogue bots one by one, switching them off and tossing them into a crate. Very not normal. Asuka lowered her voice. "You think someone is messing with them?" "I'm asking you. Yingyue says you're working on this. So what do you think?" Asuka considered the implications. If someone could mess with the bots like this, Maybe they also used a bot to deploy the bomb. It would explain why the construction crew hadn't seen the anomaly before launch, because it hadn't been there. Maybe, but how would this person have gotten it out there without anyone on my team noticing? Only DroneOps has access to the big bots, and DroneOps monitors them all 3 shifts, which also means no one could have spacewalked it out there without us seeing. Unless you think my team is all in on it. When she put it that way, it did seem unlikely. Asuka felt flustered. She flashed back to doing chemistry problem sets with her friends and always being last to get to an answer. What's the alternative? Yaz shut the box and dumped Petunia back in the deployment chute. I don't know. It got there somehow. If the bot programming is corrupted, maybe the bomb was installed by the bots while we were in hibernation. Asuka nudged the crate with her toe. It seemed hard to imagine they hadn't spotted it until now. But on the other hand, it would mean that the perpetrator was someone back on Earth, in which case maybe none of the crew were involved. Except... Alpha, wouldn't you have noticed if something happened while we were asleep? She'd already tried asking her if she knew how the bomb had gotten there, but Alpha didn't know. I'm afraid I am unable to answer your question, said Alpha. Whatever happened is beyond my awareness. I'm only a program after all. I can't see everything that happens on this ship. Asuka shivered. Alpha's presence, while sometimes overbearing, was also a comfort. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she trusted Alpha to take care of them. Yaz stopped to knead a knot in her back with her knuckles. Too many questions. Right now, what my gut tells me is that I need to pee again. Run these down to the shop? She indicated the crate. After Yaz was gone, Asuka reached into the crate and switched on one of the bots. It began to attack the others. She caught it, switched it off, and was submerged in silence again. Chapter 17, USA, 10 years before launch. The Even Star Campus Drive was lined with pine trees, scrawny and new, the beds around them freshly churned, the turf too pristine. Near the parking lot was a lawn with a giant cottonwood that could have been 100 years old. In Dar, a flock of real sparrows descended to alight on its branches as they pulled up. Asuka heard the quiet hum of so many media drones hovering outside the bus. There were only 15 candidates traveling from Japan. They had met at a lavish luncheon hosted by the government before they left. The food was prepared by a chef who specialized in French-Japanese cuisine, including a delicate clam consommé with yuzu zest, and a foie gras drenched in a soy glaze that Asuka awkwardly declined, explaining she didn't eat birds. The Emperor and Empress had attended, along with the Prime Minister, who told them they were a credit to their nation. Asuka wasn't sure if she was included in this, but she returned the bow and said, "Domo arigatou gozaimasu," in a very quiet, nervous voice. It was hard not to be intimidated. The group included an international golf sensation, a young mountain climber who had summited Mount Everest last year, a famous influencer with several 100 million followers worldwide, and a classical composer who had conducted a symphony for the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra a month ago to rave reviews. And who was Asuka? That Hafu refugee girl in second-hand clothes. The composer's name was Miki. She had glossy, perfect hair down to her waist, a quick smile, and a knack for ignoring all of Asuka's cultural faux pas. Her English was crisp, British sounding, and she'd traveled several times to Europe and America to perform. She seemed more sophisticated and mature than a 12-year-old had a right to be, and Asuka wanted to hate her, except she was also kind, and she took Asuka under her wing immediately. "Asuka-chan's from California," she told the others, as if that were cool. "Actually," Asuka said, "my mom's Japanese. I'm Japanese." When they arrived in America, the airports were uglier than she remembered, the people louder, the streets dirtier. There were dueling Mac and Nat Guard graffiti right across the tarmac that hadn't been painted over. She was embarrassed for them to see this. But as they disembarked, Asuka began to feel excited again. That spark of love one felt for returning to one's home country, even if it required her to split in two. They were directed to line up on a broad emerald lawn. The whole place had been a liberal arts college that had gone bankrupt decades before. Linda Trembling, the trillionaire venture capitalist and inventor who had brought DAR to the masses, had laid down several $1 billion and conjured Evenstar Academy in its place. Hundreds of candidates Asuka's age milled about. A lot of them had family along, though a good number didn't, the cost of flights being what they were. They moved into the large entrance hall of a grand brick building. It smelled freshly painted. Asuka was separated from the others in the confusion, but followed the crowd to a registration table. A large print name tag in DAR appeared over their chests, including name, proper pronunciation, preferred pronouns, and title. This seemed to be Evenstar standard. Asuka glanced down and saw the same information written across her own chest. "Country of origin?" the woman at the table asked. When Asuka hesitated, she prompted, "Chinese?" Asuka gave both of her nationalities. "Which one are you registered under, hon?" "Which one?" Asuka asked, confused. "Are you a candidate for America or Japan?" Asuka peeked around, as if someone else might know. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" she asked at last, her voice very small. "She means which country did you put on your application?" said a skinny, dark-haired kid checking in next to her. "DAR tag, Ruth Segal Brown. She, her." She had a birthmark over one eyelid and a canine grin that made Asuka nervous. Some countries have already pledged funds to guarantee a specific number of seats for their representatives. For example, I'm British Israeli, but I'm registered for Israel. Do you not remember what you put on your application? Her mother had filled out the application for her at the test site. It had been in Japanese, and Asuka couldn't read it. American? The registration person found the information. "Nope. You're representing Japan. Here you go, sweetheart. You're all set." Ears ringing, Asuka took the welcome package and stepped away from the table. She was so glad her new friend Nikki was not here to see this. There had to be a mistake. The annoying girl followed her away from the table. There was something about the way Ruth walked. Asuka glanced down and saw below the hem of her shorts one of her legs from the knee down with a hot pink prosthetic. "Hey, are you okay? Just don't cry. You don't want them to think you're weak or anything." "Are you trying to be nice or mean to me? I can't really tell." "Neither. I'm telling you how it is. Look, it's a smart move. You'll have fewer candidates to compete against." Horror filled Asuka. "What do you mean, compete?" They went to a large lecture hall. It was augmented to resemble a Roman Colosseum. "Kind of tacky, don't you think?" shouted Ruth. It was too loud to think. Everyone was talking, shouting for family to come on. "What?" Asuka craned her neck for Mickey and the others, but it was impossible to find them in the movement of the crowd. Ruth put a hand on her shoulder and leaned close. Her breath was hot on Asuka's face. She yelled loud enough to make Asuka's ear hurt. Japan only paid for one spot. So, only one of us gets to go? Asuka asked, clutching her cheek. Because of course, this was a competition. There were 800 kids in this room, and they were taking 80, which meant most of them weren't going to be selected. And why would any country want a rep who didn't look enough, couldn't speak enough, or be enough, citizen or not? She felt acute pain in her chest. Her heart was pounding, and she was having trouble breathing again. She thought maybe she was dying of mortification. She needed to ask her mom what to do, how to fix this great mistake. Her mom, who had filled out the form. Her eyes narrowed. Had she done it to sabotage her? With fumbling fingers, she sent her a message. Did you register me as a candidate for Japan? Her mom, who must have stayed up late to watch the live cast of her arrival, responded immediately. Yes, Mochiro. What? Why? How could you do this to me? A few minutes passed. Then, her mom said, Trust mom. Odds much better. But I'm not really GP. There was a long silence. Not seeing Mickey anywhere, Asuka slipped into a squeaky, uncomfortable seat at the end of a row in the back and waited for her mom to reply. She was trying so hard not to freak out. Ruth, who had squeezed past and sat down next to her without invitation, added, There are also wildcard spots for candidates of any affiliation, but those are way more competitive. If you don't get your national seat, you're probably screwed. You know, if I can give you some advice, can you not, actually? Cute, said Ruth, pursing her lips and giving her a once-over. Don't ask so many questions. It gives away how little you know, unless you want to wash out in year one. Asuka's face heated to maybe 100 degrees. She opened her mouth to ask how someone could wash out. Then she shut it again. A hush fell over the crowd as a large group of adults filed in front of them. Faculty, said Ruth. Asuka gave this girl what her mom called her mean eye. I'll give you some free advice, she said. Don't talk so much. It makes people not like you. I'm not here to be liked, Ruth hissed back. I'm here to win. The orientation program began, and Asuka sat there, clutching her hands until her knuckles turned white. She thought she'd die if she had to sit next to this girl another moment. Consequently, she missed all the instructions. She spent the whole hour trying to think of a good comeback. At the end of it, when everyone stood, she leaned over and grabbed the other girl's arm. Ever heard of a killdeer? What? The killdeer feigns injury to trick a predator. Don't underestimate people. It was a ridiculous comeback. Asuka got up and marched out before Ruth could laugh at her, even though she didn't have any clue where she was going. Chapter 18. The Phoenix. 3,980 cycles after launch. 0 cycles after explosion. Sea shift. Asuka carried the box of defective bots to the bot shop, metallic limbs and stubby cylindrical bodies rattling like anxiety trapped in an old mason jar under the bed. The box was heavy enough, she could already feel her arms twanging. She stopped and hitched the box against her waist, trying to think of a capital P plan. Someone was coming the other way with a tray of food, and Asuka nearly dropped the box, trying to make room for them to pass in the narrow corridor. She banged her elbow painfully against the frame of one of the modular doors, and bit back a curse as pain lanced through the nerve. Couldn't the ship engineers have designed the passage of the wheel to be just a little wider? Construction of the Phoenix had been an enormous operation. Even the majority of Linda Trembling's fortune wasn't enough to cover the cost of an interstellar voyage, so she had appealed to the nations of the world, promising them seats in exchange for funding, pitched it as patriotism and apple pie, but also world peace and a unified international endeavor. As it became obvious that a mission this expensive might be a once-in-a-human-history thing, even star fever gripped the world, with countries scrapping together tens and hundreds of billions, bankrupting themselves to make sure their people would be represented in this next chapter of human civilization. Asuka let her knuckle brush against the smooth metal panels of the passage wall, bolted and welded by hands on Earth. The modular sections of the Phoenix had been propelled up through the sky to be joined together by thousands of drones and an international work crew of 10 astronauts too old to qualify for the actual mission. Could one of the work crew have planted a bomb? Jealous of their journey? Bitter to be left behind? They would have been better positioned to do it than one of the thousands of Earthbound construction crew on the ground. Someone on the space team could have affixed it where it might not be noticed until well after launch. But then what? How had it been triggered from someone back on Earth? Through the walkie somehow? That was the only possibility. Unless Yaz was right about the rogue bots being pre-programmed 11 years ago for the task. A dull ache was building behind her eyes. Asuka, this is your off shift. You've had a stressful day. Why not try to relax? Yeah, right. Or, if you prefer, I could load the immersive for your atmospheric engineering class. They were all required to do additional advanced training in preparation for pre-assigned roles once they reached Planet X. As an alt, there wasn't any obvious role for Asuka. She needed to submit an area for mission control approval soon. In the meantime, her current studies felt as scattered and torturous as her time at school, and she was low-key panicking she'd be stuck as an alt if she didn't figure out what she wanted to be. Yeah, I'll get right on it next cycle. Fantastic. I scheduled it. That was sarcasm. Absurd to think she could concentrate on air pressure and humidity modeling right now. How exciting it had been when they first woke up and started working their shifts. Back then, when the ship hadn't felt so irreversibly far from Earth. Curiosity wilted sometime after day 100, became claustrophobia now that they were almost a year awake. Every cycle the same. Wake, eat, study, sleep, repeat. It didn't matter which cycle you were, except it had mattered. It mattered if you were Winnie, volunteering for a cook shift, and had your everything blown out against the wall. Why would anyone do this? She said out loud. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. That was rhetorical. Shall I tell you about the life and habits of the messenger pigeon? Not now. Would you like 10 milligrams of anti-stress medication? No thanks. Couldn't afford to have any fog in her brain right now. She arrived at the door to the bot shop, where the crew fixed the clever machines that maintained the ship, like the ones Asuka was carrying. The tables were strewn with parts. The shop hummed with activity. Plenty of people were there even though it was their off shift. Lala, for example, who must have come back from the dining wad, and Asuka froze, because Ruth was perched on a stool next to Lala, eating dinner. Lala waved Asuka over. More of them? Lala gestured for Asuka to set the box down on the table. Yaz has been running the bots hard. They're coming in as fast as we fix them. So, talk. What have you heard? Asuka picked up one of the bots from the box and turned it over. Nothing. Damn, Susie, said Lala. She swapped one of her tools for another and neatly disemboweled a bot. Ruth won't tell me anything either. Can you at least tell us what happened out there? Maybe she doesn't want to talk about it, said Ruth. That familiar razor-sharp tone. And even though Asuka was relieved to not have to talk about Kat, she also resented the presumption that she needed protecting. She was about to tell Lala everything just because of it, but Ruth caught her eye. The side of her mouth lifted in a secret smile, and without meaning to, Asuka smiled back. How are you doing, Asuka? Stellar. You? Oh my god, said Lala. Are we going to finally bury the body in the backyard? Leave it, Ruth said. All right. Lala pawed through the graveyard of whole and busted bot pieces on the big table. A Manu bot, about a meter tall, rolled up and deposited a socket on the table. It soldered 2 pieces together. Well, I have all sorts of theories. Manufacturing problem with the tank, or a micro leak of chemicals that caught a spark from something, or terrorism. Ruth and Asuka's eyes met accidentally over a pile of springs and screws. They both looked away, but it was too late. Ah, said Lala, jabbing a screwdriver at Asuka. So you think so too, Mac, Cobro, or FME? McMahon's death made the Mac angle a possibility, but the other 2 organizations had strongly opposed the mission too. Company of Brothers, colloquially known as Cobro, was an international men's rights group that gained prominence after Evenstar announced they were only taking mission crew who could give birth halfway through. They were best known for their 200-day occupation of the UN, during which they'd held 20 leaders hostage. And Save Mother Earth, SME, was an environmental movement. It couldn't be SME. Fuck all of them. I was happy to see their lights in the rear window when we blasted out of there, metaphorically speaking. Lala yanked off her dar gloves. Damn it! I can never feel anything properly through these. Since when is SME a terror group? Asuka asked. Since they hijacked an oil tanker 7 years ago, said Lala. No one was hurt though, said Ruth. And the time with that power plant? Ruth stirred her soup with thinly veiled annoyance. SME wouldn't have wasted the resources on this. It would have been contrary to the mission of the organization, said Asuka. There was a reason she didn't believe SME would do something like this. Didn't want to believe it. I don't know what to tell you, Lala said. A lot can change when you're asleep for a decade plus. Ruth's gaze flicked over to Asuka again. Still haven't talked to your mom? Are you okay, Asuka? Alpha was asking. Your heart rate is elevated. Ruth tongued 2 pills from her tray, a white neonatal vitamin and a blue fertility booster, and swallowed them with a spoonful of shockingly green soup. What is that? Asuka asked, trying to change the subject. Spirulina dumpling soup. It's not terrible. Except that it is. Lala plucked another bot out of the crate. Gabriella said she's volunteering for cooking duty next B shift, though. I would kill for those empanadas again. She used mealworm flour. Ruth wrinkled her nose. Like I said, delicious. Gabriella was one of the best cooks on the ship. She'd shown Asuka her personal box once. Half of it was spices. Asuka reached into the crate and grabbed one of the bots. She started to wrestle with the casing and knocked a circuit board off the table in the process. Lala caught it. Watch it? Sorry, said Asuka. face heating with embarrassment. They couldn't afford to break things. Their whole world was this ship. Nothing was replaceable. Lala passed her the circuit board, and when their fingers touched, she caught a glimpse of an atrium with big glass windows and steel beams. There was a musician with a pink mohawk plucking a string bass, and another on a brass horn. And on the horn player's shoulder, a bright green parrot eyeing Asuka funny. It said, "Watch it! Watch it!" Asuka stared at it, and Lala followed her gaze. "You like parrots?" Asuka asked. In her experience, not a lot of people had birds in their dar. It made her like Lala more. "Huh?" Lala asked. "Sorry, my implant glitch. I can see people's dar when I'm close. Like, I saw the bar and band and a green parrot over there." Asuka pointed in what she thought was the right spot. Lala glanced over. "Weird. There's no parrot, though." Asuka frowned. It had been there. She was sure of it. Lala went back to fiddling with the circuit board, but her heart wasn't in it. "God, I'm so fucking angry. Aren't you? I mean, look at us. All these years of studying, like packing for a long trip with a small bag. Our entire lives to get this far, and what for? If we never make it to Planet X." "My dads are freaking out," Wraith said, while Lala examined the bot. "They've sent me 10 messages." "My dad too," said Lala. Asuka didn't say anything. How had her mother reacted when she'd heard the news? Still waiting, maybe, for Asuka to send a message that she was fine, to respond to one of the letters she'd sent. But how could she after the last time they talked? She imagined the media furor back home. Was her mom being mobbed by news drones asking about her daughter? Or was she living in obscurity, maybe back on Obasan's farm? It was a knowable thing, and yet Asuka didn't know. There were messages in her inbox if she cared to read them. She didn't. But it didn't stop her wondering where her mom was. Like, if she had a dog. And it made her suddenly, freakishly angry, the thought that her mom might have a dog. Asuka left the table and went to the storage wall. It was lined floor to ceiling with little cabinets crammed with parts. Not that she was avoiding conversation or anything. She began to rummage through all the drawers, and as she did, everything else retreated from her mind. "You okay, Sooth?" Lala asked, coming over. The connectors aren't there." Asuka was pawing through a box of electrical wires. "Uh-huh," said Asuka, half listening. She opened a different drawer, full of black plastic casing, another of little batteries. She thought of the ever-growing distance between the Phoenix and home. "Hello, Earth to Asuka." Asuka sat on the floor with a nest of wires in her lap, thinking, all these parts, put together one way, and you make a thing whole. Put together another way, and you could blow it apart. "You're starting to freak me out," said Lala. "That drill you're looking for. If someone takes stuff from the shop, like parts or tools, is there a log that says who took them?" "There's an inventory log that says which parts have been taken from storage and when. Not who, though." "Alpha, show me the logs." A stream of data appeared. "I already tried this," Lala said. "The problem is, once it's been checked out, people borrow it from each other, so the record isn't reliable." "Are there any items that are missing without associated record of removal?" A shorter list appeared. "Why would any of them be missing records?" said Lala. "It's automated." Asuka messaged her follow-up so as not to be overheard. "Could someone delete inventory records?" "Yes, it is possible." Asuka bit back a curse. Did someone delete these? An uncharacteristic pause from Alpha, then, "I cannot confirm that." Yaz asked where the bomb came from. The how was here in her lab, in the wires and the circuit boards. This was not a remote attack. Someone on the ship had done this. She regarded the other crew, heads bent, intent on their tasks, and Lala and Roos looking at her with concern. The question was, who?